on the voter ID, an interesting idea. How does that work for our undocumented students? So, because right now, if they're an undocumented student, my assumption is they're not allowed to vote. But if they have a student ID card, then does that put them in a position to be able to vote?
Well, it's my understanding with the voter ID laws, when you go to vote, you have to swipe your ID machine.
Yes, sir.
Essentially, had that as like a designation option in the system to not allow that to function with those machines possible.
Yeah, okay, good. And Jeff, I think we had this conversation about the green fee, and that an interesting conversation. I'll pull the string on that a little further and find out what we can do to help. Because I thought it was great, and Zach part of the conversation as well. You know, the students think this is a good idea in terms of expanding the green spaces and the greenness of the campus, and we'll all work with the presidents and see what we can do. Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you for your time, everyone. I'd like to say a few more words. I'd like to introduce actually Varun Joseph. Varun is a third-year dental student at the UT Health Science Center San Antonio. He was also an MBA student at UT Arlington. He'll be the incoming chair. So a year from now, you'll get to see his beautiful face presenting in front of you all about UT SAC's recommendations. But I would like to thank the board. I've had an opportunity to meet some of you, and every time it's been an honor and a pleasure to get to know you. Mr. Chairman, thank you for everything. I guess the chairman facial hair, I guess it was the memo that I picked up on correctly this morning. Dr. Frederick, I had a chance to call her multiple times in the summer. I don't know where she's at, but I bothered her quite a bit, and she was always willing to help out with whatever I needed at UT San Antonio and with the advisory council. Mr. Chancellor, you know, our friendship began with my dance moves, but it will be sustained with his vision for higher education in the state. And thank you for everything that you're looking to do. Thank you for your leadership as well, and all moving forward. Dr. Leslie, I have big shoes to fill, sir, but I know I've done nothing but great things, and I'm confident your leadership will take its places as well. Dr. Reyes was instrumental both years. I had the opportunity to serve as UTSA student body president. Max Richards, he has set the bar for what it means to be a student region. I learn from him every single time I talk to him, and he facilitates student concerns better than I've seen anyone do it. Dr. Romo, my university president. Without Dr. Romo, I don't know where I'd be today as a leader and as a man. Also, I'd like to thank him for all the things he's done for me. I'd like to thank Meredith. There's Meredith. Meredith helps us out and UT SAC in ways that we don't have that institutional knowledge. She provides us with the tools to succeed, and I thank her for that. Chris Lyons, he is a fantastic mentor and advice giver for the advisory council. I'd like to thank him as well. Pat Francis has, how you doing, sir? He has provided input and ideas and allowed us to think in ways that I'm not sure we were exposed to previously. And all of their leadership has been huge in the work that SAC was to accomplish. But one person in particular I'd like to thank special time to recognize, and that's Dr. Wanda Mercer. 2 years ago, I told her that I'd go for a run with her. She likes to run for our UT SAC meetings. I came through on my promise. I woke up at 5 a.m. I didn't know that hour of the day existed anymore. And I haven't got a chance to run with her, but I've gotten a chance to know her over the past 2 years. And I don't think any person cares more about students than Dr. Wanda Mercer. She has continually challenged me as an individual. She has continually challenged this group, and she has continually brought the best out in every single student that has the pleasure to serve on the UT System Student Advisory Council. So without her, none of this would have been possible. Without everyone else I previously mentioned, and those in the audience today, none of this would have happened. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your consideration. It's been an honor to serve as chair. But you're in very capable hands, and the students at UT System, no doubt, will continue to get better and brighter as your leadership continues to lead. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Executive Vice Chancellor Leslie will introduce the student winners of the Regents Awards in Arts and Humanities.
by saying, as your new EDC for academic affairs, that this is a real privilege. As I begin my fourth day on the job, it doesn't get any better than recognizing excellence in student performance in the case of the arts and humanities. So it's a proud day for me to stand before you for the first time to represent student excellence and present these awards. So I present to you the recipients of the Regents Outstanding Student Awards in Arts and Humanities. And let me begin by giving you just a bit of background information about these awards. In 2012, the University System Board of Regents created the Regents Outstanding Student Awards in Arts and Humanities to recognize student achievement in these areas. Each year, the board rotates its recognition of excellence among three areas: the musical arts, the visual arts, and the creative writing. This year, I'm pleased to present the students that have been recognized for their achievements in the musical arts. Outstanding musicians from across the UT system submitted nominations in two categories: solo or duet, and performance, group performance. Canvas winners were forwarded to the UT System Office of Academic Affairs, and the student performances were evaluated by a panel of professional judges. A soloist and a group winner were chosen from all the group nominees. The quality of the student performances was just exemplary. However, this year's winners clearly stood out for the technical facility and the musicality. So, Mr. Chairman and members of the Board of Regents, I'd like to present to you the winners of the 2015 Regents Student Awards in the musical arts. First, Ms. Mira Udupati, a student at the University of Texas at Austin, was selected for her solo performance on the flute. As a flute performance major, she believes that it is her mission to express music to its fullest extent. Her academic goal is to fully encompass flute performance and all its relevant topics so that she can share and communicate her experience and knowledge effectively and holistically. Ms. Udupati, would you please come forward and receive your award? Congratulations. Next, the members of the UT Guitar Quartet were selected for outstanding musical performance by a group. The UT Guitar Quartet has had a long tenure as an undergraduate ensemble on the UT Austin campus, performing in numerous states, national and international events, including the Texas Guitar Ensemble Festival, where they took first place in their division. The UT Guitar Quartet has worked extensively with the Butler School of Music's outreach coordinator to perform concerts in the Austin area. The quartet mentor, Professor Holtzman, plans to continue the tradition of the guitar quartet with the new quartet freshmen, so the legacy will live on, which is a good thing. If you would please, and I'm going to leave all four of you, so please come up when I call your names and you'll present your awards. Mr. Kyle Comer, Mr. Carlos Martinez, Mr. Tyler Rose, and Mr. Bayless Smith. Congratulations. In recognition of your selection as this year's award winners, a monetary award in their names will be given to the Butler School of Music at the University of Texas at Austin. congratulations again on all that. Mr. Chairman, this concludes the recognition of the recipients of the Regents Outstanding Student Awards in Arts and Humanities. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Leslie. All right. Item 5 on page 21 concerns approval of the consent agenda. I would like to highlight several items. Item 8 on page 344 authorizes an agreement with UT MD Anderson Cancer Center to invest in the UT System Institute for Health Transformation and Project Diabetes Obesity Control. Item 10 on page 345 concerns a contract with UT Austin's Institute on Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault for a biennial system-wide climate survey and related services. On page 389 is a proposed employment agreement with Dr. David Daniel as Deputy Chancellor. Related to this appointment, Chancellor McRaven has asked UT Dallas Provost Hobson Wildenthal to serve as interim president until a new president is named. A search will be started immediately with the appointment of a search advisory committee to work under the leadership of Executive Vice Chancellor Leslie. Proposed employment agreements also include the following individuals. Executive Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs Steve Leslie on page 393. Dr. Gregory Memphis and UT Austin President on page 363. And UT Austin Head Basketball Coach Shaka Smart on page 367. Item 17 on page 347 requests approval of updates of the UT system, seal, woodmark, and tagline. Items 19 and 20 on pages 351 and 355 report on fiscal year 2014 post-tenure review for the academic and health institutions. Items 21 and 36 on pages 357 and 371 request changes to admission criteria for UT Arlington and UT Dallas. Vice Chairman Hildebrand advises that he will abstain from vote on item 61 on page 387 regarding a contract for UT MD Anderson Cancer Center and the Cardinal Health 200 LLC because of financial interests. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? And a second? All in favor? Any opposed? Item 6 on page 22 proposes reappointments of Vice Chairman Hicks and Hildebrand, appointment of Regent Beck to the UTEMCO Board of Directors. May I have a motion to approve this item? Thank you. Second. Thank you. All in favor? Any opposed? Passes. Item 7 on page 23 requests approval of former Regent Bobby Stillwell as regental representative to the UT Austin Intercollegiate Athletics Council for Men. May I have a motion to approve this item? Thank you. Second. All in favor? Any opposed? Passes. Item 8 on page 24 proposes to amend Regents Rule 10801, Section 3, concerning compliance with the Texas Public Information Act. Are there any questions or comments on this?
Mr. Chairman, I'm still concerned about the length of time that the UTS policy itself that puts it a year out before it actually takes place.
I'm happy to address that. Reason all I can do, frankly, I think you're right. And Mr. Chairman, could we be an opportunity to come back and see if we can truncate that timeline? We'll be happy to look at that.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Is there a motion to approve this item?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Are there questions of Chancellor McRaven regarding item 9 on page 25, proposing new Regents Rule number 10901? And this is a rule concerning the statement of UT system values and expectations.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, first I want to thank Regent Hall. He really kind of brought this to my attention early on in my tenure here, and I absolutely appreciate it. I think it's important for us as UT leaders to to kind of reaffirm and affirm these values. And when I talk about leaders, it is, you know, the regents, the chancellor, and the presidents. And I believe that this new regents rule really does represent the standards of conduct that we should uphold, and that these values are consistent with what the citizens of this great state should and would expect. So I would ask that you look at this regent rule for your consideration and for adoption.
Thank you. Comments, questions? May I have a motion to approve the chancellor's recommendation? Second. Second. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, item 10 on page 28 recommends an amendment to Regents Rule 20201 concerning confidentiality of the presidential search process. Do I hear a motion on this with recommendation? Thank you. Second? Thank you. All in favor? Any opposed? Let me ask Chancellor McRaven to outline his recommendation to amend Regents Rule 20201 concerning a new reporting structure of the UT system.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The request here is that currently the relationships between the presidents of the universities, they are direct reports to the executive vice chancellors for health affairs and for academic affairs. And what I'm asking is to realign that so that the presidents of both the academic institutions and the health institutions are a direct report to me. I think this cleans up the lines of responsibility. It really doesn't change the day-to-day activity of the executive vice chancellors. My expectation is they will continue to work with the presidents as they have been, the presidents and the senior leadership of the institutions. But this now puts the presidents in the direct report line to me so that we can further the communications and the roles and responsibilities.
Any comments or questions or concerns on this? I think it's a great move, and I think it will be a more efficient way to manage the system.
I would agree. I think the presidents that I talked to reported that. I think it's appropriate.
All right, may I have a motion to approve the chancellor's recommendation?
So moved.
Second. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes. Item 12 on page 31 recommends revisions to the Regents Rule concerning sexual harassment and misconduct and inappropriate consensual relationships. Do I hear a motion to approve these revisions? Thank you. And a second? All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. Next, let me call on Dr. Leslie regarding item 13 on page 34 concerning a new Regents Rule on assessment of student learning outcomes.
Okay, thank you, John Foster. I think we have the revised language that we'd like to propose in front of you now. But let me just begin by saying that as I read through the proposed rules and regulations, Rule 50801, I thought it sounded great, except for the fact that it needed a little more function in the language. And I talked with Regional Language last night and again this morning. We discussed the idea of adding some additional language which I would like to propose for the Board of Regents. Let me step back and just say that this proposed Regents rule seeks to ensure that UT system institutions engage thoroughly in the assessment of student learning outcomes. The proposed rule is intended to codify the board commitment to the principles of continuous quality improvement. In the context of continuous quality improvement in higher education, it should include knowing whether and to what extent graduates from a university acquire the requisite skills and knowledge to make them successful after graduation in their coursework during school and after graduation. And help the institutions in making informed decisions about changes to a program that makes student learning more effective in the future. The proposed rules as described in 50801 do not prescribe any particular method of assessment. The institutions will have freedom to design assessment of program level outcomes to meet their campus specific needs, and we academic affairs to help facilitate specific campus needs. What we propose to do is enhance the language just a bit by including, as you see in red in section 1, continuous improvement for the purpose of establishing best practices. That defines the level at which we expect these outcomes and assessments to be performed. And then we've added additional language at the end of the document, or toward the end of it, in section 4, 4.1, under requirements that state with the expectation of establishing best practices. So I submit this for your consideration. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Comments?
Well, I tell you what, I have been looking forward to this day for a long time. We have an obligation to our students and parents and taxpayers and our communities to know how our campuses are doing, what our learning outcomes are for our students, and that we maintain the level of excellence that we expect from UT system institutions. This rule, as Dr. Wesley said, solidifies the board's commitment to student learning outcomes assessments. So I'm just thrilled to be here today and able to vote on this. And I would ask the chairman if I can make a motion when we get to that point. In reading through the rule, I will tell you I've spent many hours with Dr. Reyes on this topic. We are currently testing learning outcomes at all of our campuses. There's certainly room for improvement, and one of the concerns is the level of depth of testing, because on some campuses, the testing level is not such that it is fully representative of that particular campus. And so in making the wording changes in front of you, it's an attempt to say, yes, we're going to do this, but the testing has to be at a level of depth that makes sense, that can reflect best practices for the campuses. So I'm hopeful that is how the language will be interpreted by the campuses. I also have, or would like to have, a commitment from you, Dr. Leslie, to continue to bring these assessments to the appropriate committee or the board, because this is very important. These assessments, as you'll read in 4.2, these best practices are the basis for making changes in curriculum, instruction, advising, other aspects of the educational program. This is a huge ripple effect. And it is important to keep the board engaged in the analysis and the best practices on the campuses, and that we continue to make this transparent to the public as we go forward.
Could I just say, Regent English, that I share your concerns and presenting priorities in that area, and yes, indeed, I will follow up on these things.
All right, thank you. I believe that was a motion by Regent English.
I so moved.
And a second, sir. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, and thank you for your strong. Item 14 on page 37, request approval to amend Regents rules concerning the use of facilities. Do I hear a motion to approve these amendments?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Next, under item 15 on page 39, Executive Vice Chancellor Kelly will report on the work of the group purchasing organization, Sole Source Purchasing Working Group.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. As I think you know, at the November board meeting, the Board of Regents asked me to chair a small working group to review the purchasing policies and practices of the system throughout our institutions, and to particularly those for purchases procured through methods other than the traditional competitive process, and to offer them some suggested recommendations for improvement in those practices. And I would note that this is somewhat a prescient request by our board, as they have examined and considered review of this issue many months ahead of some of the troubles that have been highlighted at some of our other agencies. So we convened the group and initially collected data from all of our institutions, asking them to provide for fiscal 2014, going back 1 year, all of the purchases that and purchase orders and contracts that they procured through methods other than this traditional process. So it would include sole source, it would include contracts where we utilized those procured through state agencies, and also use of other group purchasing organizations. And I'll probably group those last two categories together in my comments, as they're similar, but again, some of them are GPOs, if you will, through state agencies, and others are group purchasing organizations that have been set up in other methods. The report is found on page 40 of your board book, and I did want to highlight a few things. First, I don't know if we were surprised, but there was a large number of these contracts. Of the $4.3 billion or so of procurements for goods and services in 2014, 30%, or about $1.28 billion, procured through this other sort of non-traditional process, which might seem extraordinarily high, and we'll talk a little bit about that. What we found was that, in fact, there were very valid and good reasons for those procurements, and it emphasized two things that. One, that there is great value to the system and to the campuses in maintaining some degree of flexibility here and to be able to utilize some of these purchasing methods. But perhaps even more importantly, it emphasized the need for us to ensure that we do not abuse this trust that we have been given, and to guarantee that our practices really do provide that level of fairness, transparency, and the highest ethical standards needed. And so, as a result of that review, it raised the issue to an even greater level of importance for us to ensure that we recommended practices that were above and beyond reproach. The other $1.28 billion, again, about $600 million were sole source purchases. And again, one thing people think of, what are the reasons for sole source purchasing? Often they think, well, gosh, it's really just in emergency situations and there aren't a lot of dollars spent. Well, in higher ed, if you begin to look at the categories, so for example, in library purchases, which are typically produced or procured from the publishers, there's not a competitive process for that, and it's a high dollar volume. Proprietary, including pharmaceuticals, including some of our chemical agents and reactants, which are, again, sole source because of their specific need. Equipment maintenance, we have very expensive equipment, and the renewal and replacement and maintenance of that equipment can sometimes reach high dollars, and yet they must be compatible with that particular level of equipment. Similarly, if there are other pieces of equipment procured, they often must be compatible with existing equipment or have unique specifications. Often, there are some large dollars involved in grantor requirements, so there's research going on in which particular items must be procured and require that sort of sole source direction. And then professional services, which, again, go through another level of, this is architectural, legal, consulting, some consulting services, but again, more professional type, engineering, physician, etc. They do go through some review, but again, are not traditionally competitive with bids. For example, for our architectural services, we go through and we do their request for proposal. We will interview architects, and we will select them not on the basis of fees, but on the basis of the fit and their skill set, and then we'll negotiate the fees following that procurement. Professional organization memberships, and then insurance, and again, not all of our insurance, but as we go through the layering of our insurance products, there are often sole source procurements involved there as well, and then emergency purchases. The other $680 million then were really categorized into our group purchasing organizations, and again, including both state agencies as well as these other GPOs. And there are, again, as you can see, about $680 million were procured through that. Now, I would note as well, on the sole source purchases in our current policy, those still are required to come to the board, subject to the limitations, the $1 million limitation that we have. And so they do receive that scrutiny, even though they are sole source. And that best value justification must be made as well to the board. Under the current policy, or the present one, although we've actually are practicing somewhat different right now and are making recommendations for changes, as you'll see, But the GPOs, there was an opportunity for that to move forward without board approval. So if you utilized a GPO, even if it was above $1, $2, $3, $5 million, you could procure it under the existing policy without having to come to the board for approval. And so it was even a different category, and in some ways created some unique challenges. Interestingly, of about the 25 or so GPOs that are used, 90% of the volume flow through those 5. And the Department of Information Resources, another government agency, TexMOS there, and then the Premier, which is it's a GPO used by our healthcare, through the healthcare industry that had come together originally as sort of a collection of hospitals and others to, again, try to procure goods at a less expensive rate, and has grown over time. And then the Supply Chain Alliance, we put that in. That is a group purchasing organization, although it's internal to UT system. And then there's the United Cooperative Services. The next thing we found is that these are different. GPOs, again, not surprisingly, are different in their practices and their policies. The UT Supply Chain Alliance, for example, goes through a very rigorous competitive bidding process in which they work to find not only sort of to qualify the vendors, but to secure the most competitive price, and in part by communicating an aggregate spend to those vendors and narrowing choice on the campuses. And so it very much is a competitive process, I think, and it meets the rigor that I think all would be comfortable with. Others, like TIR, we met with each representatives from each of those groups to understand their processes. But like the Department of Information Resources, they provide some value. They go through a competitive process to pre-qualify vendors and to ensure they're meeting certain state requirements, they review quality, et cetera, which does, again, add value to the process. But they do not, by their own admission, at least in our discussions with them, secure or qualify or solicit the most attractive price option. And in fact, where they may have multiple vendors or multiple providers in a particular category, the pricing that's represented in those contracts typically are what would be given to almost anyone seeking use of that contract. And so it doesn't really provide the competitive advantage regarding price, but may do in terms of some of the pre-qualification. And then there are other organizations where really you just pay a fee and are a member, and there's a little scrutiny. And so there's a variation among the quality and not the quality, but certainly the expectations and what they do. The last thing I wanted to note, just in background, is as part of the process, in the midst of this, in late January, Governor Abbott published his letter to all the state agencies asking for greater transparency and better stewardship in safe contracting processes, and our chancellor and our board certainly received that and committed to the governor to immediately implement, to the extent possible, those 5 specific suggestions which were recommended by the governor, which we have then communicated to our campuses. We've also, as part of our working group, tried to understand and incorporate those suggestions by the governor into our recommendations, with also the recognition that there is pending legislation that could further influence that. So having said that, just the recommendations, which again begin on page 42. The first recommendation we have is a standardized sole source, we've titled it sort of exclusive acquisition procedure for use for purchases and definition, determination of any kind of best value award. This would be required anytime there are where only one supplier is being considered for purchases that meet the institutional dollar threshold. So normally we need to go through a bid, but you're using one supplier. You need to utilize a standardized, and we have a template in the appendix of what that might look like, although that could be reworked. But that would be utilized across the system for that. Elements of that, as we consider best practices, include, again, a clear justification of that, and then the guideline, the noted sort of the authority under which we can secure that in a non-traditional process, if you will, and then perhaps, at least to some extent, in our mind, one of the most important areas, the signature of the originator, so the the procuring department, whoever is whether that's the department chair or a person in business affairs or whoever the originator of the procurement, they must sign it. Then there needs to be a counter signature by, in essence, the department administrator, the school department head of that to again get a second signature on the sole source. There's relevant review there, and then there's dual approval as well, and signature related to the purchasing department, the buyer and the manager. Second, we recommended, we actually reviewed our current training, and I'm pleased to tell you that it is very robust. Actually, I kind of was aware of it. We looked at it more closely, compared it to some of the industry practices, and I think we are really at the best practice standard. All employees who process procurements for goods and services must go through really annual training in areas of ethics, supplier relations, applicable laws, the role of the buyer, documentation, records management, contract administration, etc. In addition, there are required certifications for the purchasing professionals who are involved in contracts or procurements above $25,000. They must obtain the certification from a number of agencies, and to secure that certification, there's a mandated level of education, depending on certification, required number of years of procurement experience, and of course, with training that must be completed. And there are some levels of that certification that mirror, again, the authority that's given to those purchasing professionals. And so we would just recommend further adherence and continued use of that policy, UTS 156. The third recommendation, and this is, I would refer you to page 44 because it begins to get a little complicated perhaps. But we recommend, recognizing that GPOs are different, we recommend a tiered approach. And so what we're suggesting is that sort of prospectively, we would like to have each GPO reviewed by a group and then go through what you would term sort of an accreditation or certification process. That would then come to the board to say, hey, the UT Supply Chain Alliance, this is the processes that they use, this is the comfort level that we have, that they're being secured in a fair way, that best prices are being secured, and that you can utilize those. And then once certified, once approved by the board, the campuses would be able to do that, although we would recommend a process to review that every 2 years. Or it may come through at a different level. It may come through, again, like, for example, DIR, where we would go through the process. We understand that, in fact, they provide value in shortening the process by doing that pre-qualification. But if you use DIR and there are multiple providers for a single service, you must go through a second step to secure a competitive pricing bid in order to proceed. So there may be something along that line that becomes a recommendation. Again, then if approved by the board under those conditions, we would be able to move forward. Given the fact that there are really relatively few GPOs that we use extensively, we don't feel that's an overly burdensome process and will allow us and the board to understand our use of GPOs. In the interim, to keep things moving, we are recommending and would like to suggest, at least until that accreditation process goes forward, that we still allow campuses to use the Supply Chain Alliance, which we have some comfort in, as they are now, although there's still a reporting requirement, which I'll get to, and a process to the board that we're recommending, but they would be able to utilize that. And then for the other four, the DIR, TexMOS, Premier, and E&I, that for those, for DIR, for TexMOS, and for E&I, that that they're able to utilize that contract, but then they must go through, again, if they identify a supplier or a category that has more than one supplier in it, in that GPO, then they must go through a second step and receive a minimum of 3 valid proposals, pricing proposals, in order to proceed. Assuming there are at least 3 providers. If there are only 2, they would receive 2 in that. So it would be they'd be able to utilize, for example, DIR to identify the 5 providers for this particular service, and then they must go through not a pre-qualification, but solicit pricing proposals for them. And again, the steps applicable to contracts over $1 million threshold for DIR, TexMOS, and ENI. And for Premier, which has, again, affects most of our health institutions, we've asked for actually a little bit higher threshold limit, which we'll see on the top of page 45. $1 million for our smaller campuses, and again, they're not used a lot there, but maybe by the Health Science Center Tyler. A $2 million threshold for the 4 emerging research institutions, and then $3 million threshold for Austin, Health Science Center, Houston, San Antonio, medical branch, etc. So again, for contracts where that category, or at least within that category, that they would be able to proceed and move forward with that recommendation, again, subject to the solicitation to receive a minimum of 3 valid diplomas, 2 if there were only in firms in that category. For services, that would be across the board. For goods only, that would be applicable only for those thresholds above $1, $2, and $3 million. In addition, the 4th recommendation, which also kind of applies to that, under our existing policy 10501, again, it exempts all purchases made under a purchasing program that follow applicable statutory and regulatory standards from coming to the board. We would recommend that be changed, and that, again, going forward, first it would apply only to those certified or accredited GPOs, although in the interim we would go back to those 5 under those conditions that we mentioned. But they would still come to the board, again, at threshold limits noted here, just similar to what we mentioned before. If they're over $1 million for the smaller campuses, Brownsville, Pan Am, Permian Basin, Rio Grande, Tyler, and Health Science Center Tyler. $2 million for the 4 emerging research institutions, and $3 million for Austin and the other health campuses and UT system. So again, they would be able to, if they were under that amount, and they are use of a GPO that's eventually certified under the conditions of that certification, or in the interim, if they are, if they're at the Supply Chain Alliance or under those 4 other GPOs with the qualification that for services they receive, they go through that competitive process, then they would be able to move forward without going to the board. If they're over that threshold, then they would come to the board for approval. Now, in addition, to expedite it a little bit, in order to allow campuses to move more quickly rather than wait for board approval, what we are suggesting is another step in which there would be an expedited process. And we've got to make sure, as we recommend this, that we don't violate quorum and other board policies. But similar to what UTINCO does for some of their approvals, we would recommend that if there is one that falls in this category, so it's a use of GPO that's been approved, subject to those limitations, but it's over, say, $4 million for UT Austin, that there is a communication that is sent to members. We chose the Audit and Compliance Committee of the board, and that they would have sort of 48 hours to review that, and if they have a question, or if they have a desire for that to appear to the board, or to come to the board for discussion, then they would just notify the board office or someone in that 48-hour period, and we would not continue, we would not proceed with that procurement. If it does, however, seems routine, and the members of the Audit and Compliance Committee are comfortable, then it would be allowed to move forward with that. So it allows, again, some expedited process, but some review by the board and some discussion of items that they feel need to be discussed. In addition, just from our institutions and from a system perspective, if there are items that we know might merit more discussion, we would probably bring those to the board anyway. And then lastly, whatever we do, we would still want to provide a quarterly report to the board of those purchases utilizing this GPO, and actually probably the sole source going back for the last 3-month period. So there would be a post-review process as well for the board to see. Again, that one included on page 45, but I know is a little bit complex in the recommendations. Item 5, again, this was a recommendation that was consistent with the governor's letter and then also has been raised here by the board even in advance of that. An institutional web page reporting information on all sole source contracts That actually has been implemented already by our campuses, and we would continue that. Recommendation 6, again, an item from, I think, from the governor's letter that we would concur with, that for all procurements above $5 million, that there be a certification from the appropriate procurement director or manager certifying in writing the procurement method to the agency head, the president or the chancellor. So there would be okay, this is why this is what's being done, and this is why, so that the agency head would have an opportunity to review that and have that document certification on file. And again, we recommend a common certification template, and we provided an example of that in the appendix. Item 7, again, we would, here is, I know there were some recommendations in the governor's letter regarding conflict of interest. We actually reviewed those fairly closely. We're, at least from our perspective, and that could change based on what the legislation requires, but we believe our current conflict of interest policies, which have been reviewed repeatedly, are fairly robust and actually suggest best practices, and we would recommend this continuation of those policies. Similarly with item 8, again, we reviewed, there's a threshold limitation. We looked again at the training levels that are required, and we believe the current delegations that are in place, subject to this new review for GPOs to the board, which we're recommending, actually meet that need. And we're not sure that there is much additional value added in, for example, requiring the president or the chancellor to sign all contracts. And so our recommendation, again, certainly with respect to the governor, and need to be transparent and fair, but we believe that our current practices really do meet that need. And then lastly, we also would recommend a study, and with some exceptions, some contracts, for example, food services and concessions, but we believe that virtually all of our contracts, it would be beneficial to implement some term limits, perhaps no more than 5 years, including extensions. That was one of the issues that we found. Sometimes these contracts are renewed regularly for lengthy periods of time, and as you get more comfortable, you tend to lose some of the pricing advantages, et cetera. We think this needs a little bit more study. We'll have to run the specific recommendations, but we do think that that's worthy of some degree of discussion. And then finally, just a couple of future thoughts, and these really came out from both from our review of the data, but I know were highlighted here as well by members of the board. Two-area review and consideration of our use of consulting services. We understand, one, that there is a use for these. So we wish sometimes there were not, but when looking at narrow proficiency that we may not have, temporary nature of a project study, some independent approach to review, it's often very valid and useful to engage in consulting services. But we also recognize that these are some of the most difficult to negotiate and manage to get the incentives and the risk balance to ensure that it's shared, that value is maximized, and the objectives are met. I think we made some progress in that area, but this is an area that we think would merit some further study to increase our efficiency and to save some money. And then secondly, in looking at sort of this whole process of how you control purchasing and procurement, we think there is value in at least exploring a sort of continued consolidation. We've had great success with the Supply Chain Alliance, both in saving money, but also as you think about bringing this together, if we were able to do it right to ensure that the campuses are served, the decision-making rests with the campuses, by narrowing the number of individuals in that procurement pie, you're able both to kind of control the quality a little better, implement changes as needed, and to enhance efficiency. Again, there's a lot of complications with that, but I do think it also is an area for further study. So with that, I will stop and be happy to entertain any questions.
Sarah?
In two of your recommendations, the establishment of thresholds, and the second one, you talked about reporting for practices of the board. Can you talk a little bit about the internal controls behind those thresholds to make sure that we're catching things versus learning about them?
Yeah, so there is, and I can get you more details, there is a delegation limit in terms of how it moves forward, both in terms of the training required and who is authorized on a particular campus to sign off on that. and how it moves forward. But all we're really removing, well, before, the final arbiter of that, the final thing was the Board of Regents, and for all purchases over $1 million, which still applies for all competitively bid purchases and all sole source purchases. The use of the GPOs had a blanket exception of going to the board, and which again was designed to try to facilitate. These are contracts, with the thought being that these are processes that have already been competitively bid, and you can move forward. What we found was, well, that's the case in some instances, it's not always the case, and we felt that there was a need for some additional board approval. We chose the limits of $1 million. We started kind of with $1 million, which is where all these come to the board. We tried to expand that a little bit for our larger campuses, again, to provide them a little more operating room, and recognizing that the capabilities of an MD Anderson and a Southwestern and the staffing depth there is larger. And they have other delegations that are similar. And then secondly, we wanted to provide an opportunity to, even in that process, to expedite it. So again, the idea of sending it around to members of the Audit and Compliance Committee to at least identify, not whether they approve it or disapprove it, but this is something we would like to have more discussion about, to defer, to allow them to react a little bit more favorably. So what we tried to do, again, and work with the campuses, is identify that sweet spot where they thought they could get most of their work done that they needed to quickly, and still recognize the board approval. But there are multiple control points on the campus going forward. In fact, this enhances that.
Scott, thank you very much for the I know y'all put in a huge amount of work on this for you and your team, and I appreciate the recommendations. In terms of, I forgot which was number 5, whatever it was, in terms of making it public, on the website or whatever, how detailed is that report? I mean, does it show the scoring on an award and who signed it? Is it really the contract that's shown, or is it just a generalized reference?
There's an individual contract. I'll have to get you the details of that. There are a number of fields that have been required. We can provide that, and it was consistent with the governor's letter. I don't know that it provides the scoring, but it certainly is contract by contract. It shows the value, the vendor. I'll have to get that.
And the reason I ask, because I do, as you know, strongly support the idea that the public be made aware of how we're spending our money and where and what products and services. Because I do think for companies trying to move into new business segments or entering the state for the first time, go do this and say, well, we can do better than that. We'd like to try to get that business as well. But the detail is important.
Yeah, and we can leave it. And again, let me also mention, these are recommendations now to the board that certainly can be worked, and I don't know that that's overly problematic to kind of have an interaction, show you what we have, and if you feel we need to add more fields to that. Again, assuming it's readily available, that should not be a problem.
Okay, great. And then the other issue, and we've discussed this also, is that, on the consulting piece, that there's a lot of ambiguity there in how these RFPs are written, and where sometimes they appear to be written in such a way that only the vendor that was designed in the first place has a chance of giving the right answer. And so it's a preordained outcome, if you will, it appears to be, both in terms of the vendor and the idea that was solved. And so I don't know what your timeline is for that particular area, but I think that's one of the areas clearly where there might have been the most use.
Yeah, so 2 issues. We try to address it in the short term a little bit here by, again, all contracts now over $3 million, period, will come to board. And this is very level, even use of the GPO. The fact that if there are multiple providers in the use of GPO, and for the services issue, that we do create a scope of work and solicit proposals for that. But longer term, it's not, and it's extraordinarily complex. You can write the best RFP, solicit proposals from consultants, get one on, for example, an implementation of a large software system, or whatever it might be, and you're 3/4 of the way through the process. and you need additional help or something goes wrong, it's hard to go to anyone else. I mean, it really is. And so we've got to understand that we have thought about that. We do think it's a major process. It's a huge spend. It'd be nice to just eliminate it, but obviously we can't. There are great uses of that. But determining how to set deliverables-based contracts, which again, Chancellor has advocated, and we're working through on a couple of those cases now, and then trying to hold the consultants accountable. We've also toyed with the idea, we're starting to kind of implement, we put that in recommendation of sort of a post, similar to what OFPC does. They engage a firm to come back at the end of the construction process to go back and audit all of the contractor's records, typically find a little bit here and there. Some sort of similar process to go back and then look at what the consultants promised and whether or not we secured those services. Because again, if you have a consultant, they come on campus and they engage an employee that doesn't do very well, you still pay for that. And then they come back and bring the other one in, and so it's challenging to hold to get that level of accountability. So it's not going to be an easy or a short process, but it is one that we thought was
And the last thing I would say is, this process, general process question. This whole issue, certainly with the previous board, came to light through an article by Mr. Horowitz over there in the Statesman. It just brought something to our attention that we were unaware of, which started the snowball, if you will. How did this get missed in the audit process?
Well, and again, we didn't spend a lot of time on that. I will say that our impression, for example, let me just put it that way, of how some of the GPOs operated, and in fact, at least what we felt and what might have been communicated in some ways, was not necessarily always the case. Now, I will say, and we haven't looked at this closely, and we haven't found, and that wasn't part of our purpose, we didn't go back, but nothing's jumped out at us that suggests that this was certainly fraudulent or even overly problematic, but there clearly were some lost efficiencies. So, for example, if you use one of these GPOs and you go and select a contractor, you had assumed that there was some competitive pricing that had gone through, and in fact, you selected, part of the reason for selecting them was because you had part of a GPO which had a large spend, and so you could get a lower price. And in some cases that's true, in other cases it's not. And so some of our campuses already have been going through that second step of competitively bidding, and really pretty much all have implemented that now, even in advance of this. But on the other hand, the other challenge we have is sometimes these things really do need to go through quickly. And so, because there's value in getting that done, and so we're trying to balance that. And then lastly, I would say the other piece that probably, two things in kind of the overall best practice. One, we just need to do better documentation, standardization, et cetera, and I think that's just growth time. And then secondly, I think the other issue is, coming back to the board at least at some threshold. The ability to remove the board entirely from what were some very large contracts with the GPOs was probably just a mistake.
Thank you.
Dr. Dillon, thanks. Nice work. A couple of clarifying questions. So, $1.28 billion was spent fiscal year 2014 on sole source non-competitive bidding.
Or GPOs. About $600 million on sole source, about $680 on the GPO uses.
You have good working knowledge of the system. Doesn't that seem like an incredibly high number?
Well, that was our first thought, but again, if you look at, and I give you numbers, healthcare is, probably 60% of them health is pharmaceuticals, and some of the chemical agents and such using that was a large dollar amount. Libraries was a very large dollar amount. Some of the research expenditures, which are controlled by the grantor, were large. As we sort of picked through it, we were less. I was less surprised than I thought. And again, on the sole source, the other issue, they still come to the board. I mean, at least that one had the control point of it was over $1 million, still came to the board. What we felt was lacking was a greater clarification and standardization of that justification. And, but, I will say, and we spent some time looking through the data, because that's the first, man, this is huge. As you look at it in an academic enterprise, and the requirement to tie some of these things together, the other, again, equipment, for us, some of the research equipment and some of the healthcare equipment, which is extraordinarily large, you do a maintenance on a PET scanner or some of those things, it can be huge, and you've got to use that vendor. It seemed to make more sense to us. And again, so it came back to the reverse thing, okay, well, one, we need to preserve this. If we don't have it, it's really, it would wreak havoc. And two, if we're going to preserve it, then we certainly better have best practices. We certainly better put controls in place to ensure we don't abuse that trust.
Just a couple of other points. In the private markets, you have something called authority for expenditure, which is essentially the limit that any one individual or entity can spend. And it seems as though we could make a fairly or have you seen this? We have a matrix as to individuals and what limitations they have on authority for expenditure. Do we have that in a relatively straightforward format? Because I suspect to the procurement officers and deans and chairmen, it's very complex as to what they can approve and what they can't. Is there any way that we can provide a clean format so people understand in the matrix environment what they have authority to spend and what they don't?
Absolutely. And it's in place, it just probably has not been gathered in the community.
I think that'd be great. And to clarify, a couple other points. The term, certainly 5 years, that's an eternity in terms of contract length. And so we should really review that contract term, because to put 5+ year contracts in place is, the world changes.
Right, and that's what we found. We found some that were well beyond it, and just with automatic. And again, might have been the case, maybe even the same method going through the competitive process again. As you say, things change.
And then the last question, if you had to estimate in aggregate how much the system spends on consulting fees on an annual basis, what do you think that number would be?
Yeah, I figured you'd ask me that. It's hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, it is,
But they're really not even consulting. I mean, they're not technically consulting fees, are they? When we go through the process, I mean, these organizations don't even refer to as consulting fees.
Yeah, I guess I should go. We have software implementations, often the implementation part of that's a huge piece. We have some traditional consulting business analysis. There are, we didn't specifically gather it for this, but we will gather it. It is large. There is great opportunity there.
There is, and this is a real irritant to me.
I know.
We have 100,000 plus employees in the system that are very smart and dedicated people. We can figure out our own problems. We don't need to bring in outside consultants to tell us how to run our businesses. I mean, in certain subject matter issues, we need consultants. We need to solve the problems ourselves. And so I would really like to see a push to aggregate the data, determine how much we're spending on consulting fees, and then work on it over time to drive those costs down. Because we need to be doing the work ourselves.
I just want to add something to that, Jeff, that part of the problem, I think, and that is that, as we discussed also, is that sometimes consumer institutions go outside, so the idea isn't internally generated. I mean, they get cover for what may be an unpopular idea on campus by getting the expert to come and tell us what we should do. And I don't know how we deal with that, but that's a real issue.
And again, boy, I agree, and I don't want to add on to it. The other challenge we have sometimes is actually when you go to the consulting world, you get a little less creative answer than you think. You get something that's really more homogenized that's being utilized throughout, and so some of the creative thinking can be lost. But I will say, I mean, again, there are some narrow proficiencies and there are some time issues where sometimes you need, again, it's how you control it, but sometimes you need 50 people to work on this for 2 months,
becomes problematic to marshal those resources. There are situations, but I agree, I think.
They need to be the exception rather than the rule, because clearly those unique issues exist, and we need consultants to help us on particular problems. But we just need to get out of the process of always relying upon consultants to solve our problems. We've got smart people within the system. We can solve it ourselves.
Yeah, Doctor, first of all, thank you for all your hard work, and I agree with all your recommendations. I just had one precise question. This has to do with how the exemption from board review cap is determined. If you have, for example, a 4-year contract that requires an expenditure of $1 million a year, does that fall within the exemption under your recommendation?
That would be the total value of the contract. So it would be a $4 million contract with control.
Okay, other questions? The comment I'll make is just in general, I'm very supportive of consolidating purchasing and you know, benefiting from the economies of scale and sharing resources and all that kind of stuff. But I think you also have to be very careful not to start acting like the federal government and becoming so big and inefficient that you might save money on a fountain pen, but you spend so much money on the process of getting it that you would have been better off not.
Oh, I agree, and we're a long way from that. It's just, I'm not sure where we'll end up. I just know that, I just thought about, for example, these websites. It'd be nice to have one rather than 15. You know, and if you need to change the authority and train, it's easier to do it with 1 or 2 or 5 than 14 or 15. But on the other hand, too, you also, you don't want to increase the length of time for the campuses. You've got to serve them. You get inefficiencies in terms of becoming so large. I don't know where the sweet spot is. We just felt, we decided that it might be an area that we can have some discussions. But there's no predetermined conclusion.
My other comment, and it's more personal, and that is that I've been on the other side of this GPO process in some companies that I've owned, and I'm generally very frustrated by the process. And smaller companies in particular have a very difficult time. And I'm talking more on the medical side, that have a very difficult time ever getting a GPO contract to start with. So there are certainly benefits to doing it, and I'm in favor of it, and I commend you for all your very fine work. But I also think we need to proceed with caution and always recognize that there are sometimes exceptions and sometimes better ways to do it.
Great point, and I'm hopeful that as well the additional transparency, both the report to the board so that you can see where that's being spent, and also the websites will highlight if we're missing some of those opportunities for inclusion of some of our smaller things.
I would echo that, Mr. Chairman. I would say, you know, it is a balance between centralizing and decentralizing this process. We've got to give the campuses some autonomy. We have to trust them. We've got to give them the tools to be able to make the best purchasing decisions that they can. But we have to trust them, because we don't want to save money on pencils and not be able to cure cancer. So it's all about the mission. And so we've got to find the right balance, I think, in terms of how we handle this.
Chairman, I would just like to thank CDC Kelly, Dr. Kelly, for your work and for the work of the board. I think particularly when this has become a subject of late, of great interest and concern to citizens, obviously we need to be very, to demonstrate absolute best practices in purchasing while trying to make these balances that we're discussing. And I think that we should, I certainly would like my perspective to express our gratitude to Regent Hall for having been persistent, tenacious, in pursuing Hall's concerns have been an important catalyst for the work that's taking place, and certainly not exclusive of Regent Hall, but if it hadn't been for his tenacious efforts, that this we wouldn't have been able to get ahead of what in other portions of state government has turned into a purchasing scandal. So I wish to recognize Regent Hall for his sometimes unpopular resistance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, we're gonna take a 5 to 6 minute break. Thank you. We will defer item 16 on page 67 until after our executive session. Next, on item 17, let me call on Chancellor McRaven to introduce a report on admissions procedures at UT Academic Institution.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This morning, I'd like to have Dr. Larry Faulkner present the results of the Blue Ribbon Panel, which we formed on February 13th of this year. And I do want to thank Dr. Faulkner for chairing this. I also want to thank, at the time, Executive Vice Chancellor Pedro Reyes, who kind of shepherded the effort. And I do want to point out to the audience that the Regents, these are not my final recommendations to the Board of Regents on the admissions policy. This is part of the process. We will take into consideration the Blue Ribbon Panel, the white paper, the Kroll report, and then I'm going to ask Dr. Steve Leslie to talk to all the presidents, pull the presidents, meeting the presidents. We will take all these things into consideration, and then at the August board meeting, I will present to you my recommendations for the admissions policy. And again, I do want to take the opportunity to thank former Chancellor Dan Burke, who was a member of the panel, former Chancellor and President Bill Cunningham, obviously President Larry Faulkner, who chaired it, former President Peter Flund, and former Chancellor Mark Udolph, who is unable to join us today, and again, Peter Reyes and his ex officio staff role. So without further ado, Faulkner, if I can turn it over to you, please.
Thank you, Chancellor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. It's my honor to speak today, and I'd like to acknowledge my partners in this process, former Chancellor Burke, immediately to my right, former Chancellor and former UT Austin President William Cunningham. To my left, former UT Austin and UT San Antonio President Peter Flund, further to the right. As the Chancellor mentioned, we also had with us, not today, but with us in work, former Chancellor Mark Udolph, who is also former President of the University of California and the University of Minnesota. The full text of the panel's report was furnished to you in advance, so I'll just cover main points here, setting the stage for questions. The Blue Ribbon Panel on Admissions was appointed by Chancellor McRaven in February with a 3-point charge. We met all the points with unanimous agreement on substance and language. The panel began by articulating fundamentals upon which any system of practice regarding admission should be built. Here are our main points concerning presidential responsibility and authority. In Rule 20201, Section 4, the Regents have defined the President's duties elaborately and clearly. The President has general authority and responsibility within the bounds of regental and system-level policies and oversight. In the panel's view, the admission of students to a public university is a central process, bearing strongly on the institution's public identity, its service to the people, the quality of its academic programs, and its external academic standing. The panel does not believe that a firewall should seal the President off from important duties in this area. The office has many responsibilities in which public trust is invested. We do not accept the argument that the President's work regarding admissions is so risk-laden that he or she should be removed from it. Panel members agree that a well-earned reputation for integrity
priceless asset of a public university. The President's top priority regarding admissions must be to assure that the work is actually carried out and is broadly understood to be carried out with the best achievable fairness and validity. To the extent that confidence in admissions practices has eroded, we judge that the answer is in improved presidential accountability, not the removal of this one duty from a president who otherwise is fully responsible for the well-being of his or her institution. Now I turn to the president's involvement in the annual admissions cycle. The panel believes that it is appropriate for the president to be involved in planning and policy development prior to and during an admissions cycle. From time to time, when the president has relevant knowledge, he or she might also participate in the evaluation of the student's credentials. The members of the panel judge that this is an acceptable practice. The president has a depth of experience and range of responsibility that qualify him or her fully for such work. Nevertheless, we advise that with rare exceptions, the president leave to the admissions staff the final evaluation of credentials after he or she has commented. Having an able senior professional in charge of the annual process of undergraduate admissions is important to the institution and to the president. A university is best served when this person has clear delegated authority for normal operations, including related decision-making. Even so, there may be individual cases in which the president disagrees strongly enough with the admissions staff to make an independent final decision on an applicant's admission. The members of the panel believe that the president now has this authority under the Regents' rules and should retain it. The evaluation of issues is complicated, and the president needs always to have the ability to act optimally and properly for the institution as he or she judges within the parameters of the holistic admissions process. But decisions to override the outcome of the regular admissions process should be taken judiciously and rarely. Toward accountability, the members of the panel recommend that the chancellor require of each president a face-to-face personal report at least once per year to discuss admissions cases in which the president made an independent final decision. If the chancellor is not satisfied with the president's approach and actions, the chancellor has options for follow-up. The panel members believe that admissions is not an area in which open records offer an appropriate avenue of accountability. By its nature, an admissions process deals individually and personally with applicants. Each has the right to expect the institution to hold in confidence their identities and information. This is the reason for our emphasis on a mechanism of accountability built on direct, face-to-face reporting and discussion. Let us now turn to the handling of letters and calls, sometimes called unsolicited communication. In the experience of the panel members, there is no harm in most of this communication. The majority of the letters simply convey information of the kind normally found in supporting letters without any suggestion of request for special treatment. The panel report speaks in detail to the recommended handling of letters, email, messages, or calls in various categories. Toward brevity, I omit those details here. Rare letters and calls involve attempts at undue influence. The panel judges that an unsolicited communication manifests an attempt at undue influence if it involves any coercion of institutional personnel. Many such cases are not egregious and can be disarmed by the president. Others simply become moot because of the applicant's own success in the process. In any case, the president has a clear duty to protect the admissions staff from any part of coercion. If, in a very rare case, there is coercion based on a serious and credible threat to the university's future, the panel recommends that the president consult in a timely manner with the chancellor, the executive vice chancellor for academic affairs, and the chairman of the Board of Regents. With regard to admissions to professional degree programs, the panel's views are simple. Deans should, by presidential delegation, be principally responsible for admissions to the professional programs in their schools, with roles and responsibilities mirroring those of the president regarding undergraduate admissions. Now I turn specifically to the Kroll report. The panel does not see the necessity to institute policies that are sharply restrictive with respect to the number and sources of supporting letters in a student's file. But if an institution judges that policies are needed in this area, we urge that they be made simple and easily explained. The panel members are in agreement with Kroll's recommendation to establish a policy that unsolicited communication should not unduly influence admissions decisions. The panel agrees with Kroll's recommendations regarding inquiries from third parties. The privacy of a student's record, including his or her application for admission and its status at any time, must be guarded with care. The panel does not agree that the president should be precluded from judicious, rare, independent actions in admissions cases for good and sufficient reason. Moreover, the panel believes that it is unwise to place the Office of Admission in the role of judge over the president's actions, as Kroll suggests. The chancellor and the executive vice chancellor for academic affairs are the proper agents of accountability. Kroll speaks extensively about the system of holes in the Office of Admissions at UT Austin. While the panel recognizes the legitimate administrative needs that gave rise to the procedures, it is amply clear that this system is no longer appropriate, for it feeds mistrust in the integrity of the process. The panel recommends that it be abandoned. All efforts should be made to avoid tagging any student's file except as needed to meet internal needs of the admissions process itself. Presidents and deans will still want and need timely information about the outcomes of admissions cases, but the mechanism for assuring their notification should be separated from the individuals and the tools involved in the actual evaluation and decision making. The panel agrees with Kroll that there is no need to establish elaborate admissions committees. The members do believe that admissions processes should involve collaborative decision making among multiple qualified parties. Finally, we turn to the white paper on admissions. The panel agrees that each institution should revisit and update its written policy governing admissions. We are not in agreement with all elements recommended in the white paper for inclusion in such a policy, but I've already covered our points of disagreement. The white paper also includes recommendations for best practices under 5 headings. Ensure transparency through the admissions process, identify for prospective students the criteria used in holistic review, promote consistency in holistic reviews, uphold the integrity of the admissions process by eliminating external influences and conflicts of interest, and encourage accurate and timely communication between students and staff, admissions staff. The panel fully endorses the points in the white paper under 4 of the 5 headings, 1, 2, 3, and 5. The members support the goal expressed for the 4th heading, which is the one on conflicts of interest and external influence, but not most of the provisions in the related text. We suggest alternatives that we believe to be superior. Admissions processes at a highly selected public university in Texas are intrinsically complex. Practical policies applied with integrity and sound judgment are essential. The panel has endeavored to deliver a report that can be useful over time for those who must develop such policies and carry them out across the University of Texas system. This concludes our briefing. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Faulkner. I really do appreciate the time and effort that you guys put into this. It means a great deal to us. And just the integrity that you guys have as a panel and the experience and knowledge that you have, I think gives a lot of weight to your recommendations, and it really is very much appreciated.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'd like to open it up for any comments or questions from the board. Richard Kramer.
Thank you, gentlemen. It was very helpful to read the report, and I agree with many of the conclusions, most of the conclusions that you come to. There's a lot of focus on implementation as opposed to the goal. And you mentioned on point 4 that you agree with the goal, which refers to an unbiased determination of the appropriate merits of each applicant. The information that is not directly addressed to the merits of the applicant is inappropriate to the process. And I'm curious, what is, regardless of how the process is carried out, is the goal to judge an applicant only on the merits of the applicant, or should there be consideration made of the ecosystem around the applicant, who the supporters are of the applicant, whether or not it might be in the best interest of the university for financial donations possibly to occur associated with the recognition of not necessarily specifically a quid pro quo, but a more generic kind of assessment, or should the purpose for that admission process be solely the determination of the merits of the individual applicant?
Well, I think the criteria are up to the regents to determine, and in the policies of the individual institutions as those are written out. I personally believe that the student's merit as evaluated in the holistic process should be the determinant of the decision. But I think it's also important for everyone to understand that there is no bright line. When discussions about admissions often take place in the press or in the public, there seems to be an assumption that there's sort of a very clear line that the students on this side of it are clearly not admissible and those on that side of it are not. There is no bright line because the holistic process involves weighting, which is a matter of judgment. And different people weight different properties or characteristics of students or merits of students in different ways. So I think that student merit should be the overriding concern, should be the basis for the admissions process.
Could you or the Blue Ribbon panel have a recommendation or judgment about whether if two applicants of roughly comparable merit are considered, and one of them is attached to the hope for substantial financial donation
ever recall actually an admissions case that followed that pattern, so I don't know if I want to speculate about it.
I never did either, but I would say this. I think all of us would strongly oppose anything that smelled like, thought like, seemed like some kind of a quid pro quo. That's just unacceptable. It's just it. I would say that this whole process involves more than just high school recommendations from a counselor. And if a governor, as an example, was out in West Texas and met a young man or woman and said, you know, wow, this person has just fabulous, interesting things about their life that may not show up on the traditional resume. Are we supposed to say, no, we can't take that into consideration? In the same way, if a Nobel Prize winner is to write us and say, you know, I met this young lady and she comes from a different background, but the way she thinks about science is just unique. And it's just the way that I think is going to change the world we live in. Are we supposed to say no? That he's not teaching at a high school? That just seems silly to me. So in that sense, I think you need to come back and focus on the holistic process and realize that's what makes it work. But a quid pro quo, not acceptable. You just can't go there. And I never saw it. In all my, I only did this for 15 years, but I never saw it.
Well, I wasn't suggesting that the contrast would be that stark. And I think certainly the examples we cite clearly bear on the merits of the individual and not the...
But they wouldn't show up in the traditional ACT score, SAT score, high school rank, that kind of thing.
Sure.
And so you have to be able to look beyond that. If you don't trap yourself in a way that you will not admit
But
the best students you want.
fall in within the merits of the individual.
In my mind, they do.
Sure.
Thank you very much for your report. I'm sure you are all familiar with the June 2004 document, which is the proposal to consider race and ethnicity in admissions that UT Austin submitted to the board for approval, which was...
I signed it, yes.
Okay. So, and as you know, when we talk about a clear line of who gets in and who doesn't, while I completely agree with you on it's not a clear line on who's qualified and who's not qualified, the process that's designed and the one that we were imposed upon in affidavits and interviews is that it is incumbent upon the admissions process to do a holistic reading where all the files are read together. If you apply to one school, you're going to be in competition with those other kids that applied, and your file's going to be read at the same time. And everybody gets a score. The AI and PAI go in the matrix. There's your score, you're a cell. And then the admissions process goes through and they put a stair-step line. Everybody on one side gets an offer. Everybody on the other side gets denied. And the policy shows that any one person, any applicant in a cell that gets an offer, everybody in that cell needs to get an offer. One's denied, all denied. So, you know, there is a clear red line on who gets into the holistic process.
But there's judgment involved in your creation of the cells in the first place.
I agree 100%. But the problem that Kroll identified was that the holistic process was set aside, it appears to some of us. And because no one item should get you in underneath all of our testimony. And, but in fact, that outside of the holistic process, you know, seats were added and kids were accepted in front of others that had scored higher. And I'm trying to understand what circumstances might exist to where an applicant who was next in line for C2C gets denied what they had earned because a politician or somebody with a better access to the president's office gets that seat. I don't understand how that is ever acceptable.
Well, I don't think we actually advocated that.
Well, but But so what, other than the president being involved in setting the policy, which is established, I mean, that's what happened, that's what we did, that's what it's supposed to be, that's what we've already approved. How can the president be involved beyond that without doing something different than the policy already allows? I mean, in what circumstances should she or he ever intervene? Who happens to be in front of another applicant?
I view it that the president is the chief admissions officer. Somebody has to be in charge. As President Bush used to say, somebody has to be the decider. Somebody has to make a decision. And someone may weight that letter from the Nobel Prize winner one way, President may weight it another way. President weights it one way, he may be in one cell, weights it another way, maybe in another cell. And I don't find anything inherently wrong with that. Someone has to be the final decision maker. And it's not, and it is a holistic process. It's not just based on SAT scores, high school rank, those kinds of things. So many factors.
I understand that, but the problem is that the holistic process will have concluded by then. Either the letter
They're
doesn't.
not all done the same day. It's not how it works. It can't be. No, it's not humanly possible. It's not possible.
I understand that, but at some point the class is full. And then what we're talking about are spots that are added after the fact. I mean, when the track meet is run on Saturday, and there's 100 winners, there's also a 1v20 loser.
Yeah, and I used to work for a guy named George Kosmetsky, who used to say, hey, never make a decision until you have to, and if you made a decision that was wrong, change it. And so the president of the university realizes at some point that through some process, whatever it was, that a chief admission officer runs up and says, Mr. President, we messed up, we didn't see this letter from the Nobel Prize winner, we didn't understand the facts of this case, we like to add one more person to the class. I'm not burdened with it. That's just not a problem. Life is just not definable in that way. A big university like UT Austin is just not that simple. So to say that we're going to admit 2 more people because we got information, as I say many times, not to the president's office, through some other vehicle, that's just not a burden for me. We need to make the best decisions we can with the information we had at the time.
That's correct. And we, with respect to the investigative part of the parole report, we did not revisit that at all. Our charge was to speak to the future, how to operate with the best effectiveness and integrity and admission system going forward. That's what our report focuses. So we have nothing to say about the investigative part of the parole. Anything that Peter or Dan would like to do?
No, I think it's been properly covered there, and those are good questions. I'm a business person by background, and I find this situation really relatively simple. You develop good, solid policies that are approved by the board or whoever needs to approve them. You hold your chief executive officer accountable, and there are accountability measures built into this report whereby the president has to come to the chancellor and discuss these issues on an annual basis. I have run a number of large enterprises, and I would hate to think that I would ever have to build a firewall between my chief executive officer and any part of that operation. Totally against that. Both on accountability and in that accountability process, that president or those presidents are going to have difficult decisions. And some of them are going to be a little gray. There are no bright lines, as the chairman here said. So you have to give them a little flexibility. And once a year, when he comes in to discuss this with the chancellor, those issues should be discussed. And if the chancellor is not happy with the way that's running, he holds that president accountable. Thank you.
In my years, we had calls and we had letters. We also had the provisional admissions program. This was a program by which any graduate of a accredited high school who did not meet the admission standards could enter in the summer, and if they took certain courses and achieved a certain grade point average, they would be regularly admitted in the fall. That took a great deal of pressure off of the system. At that time also, the legislature hadn't entered the admissions policy arena. I didn't like to say no absolutely to anyone, and if they, for one reason or another, did not qualify for the provisional admissions program or didn't want to enter the provisional admissions program, we tried to develop a plan by which they could eventually transfer into the university. We would recommend, for example, that they go to Temple Junior College and take certain courses, and if their grade point average was acceptable, they could transfer in. It's very difficult when a legislator calls and is representing a constituent just to give them a flat no. We tried to work something out that he could take to the constituent and say, I have a plan by which student X can enter the institution. And that worked, but it was a different time and there were different pressures. So I agree with what the panel has concluded, that walling the president off from any part of the institution's operation is a mistake.
One other topic question. I personally do agree with your conclusion about the importance of the president taking responsibility for admissions. And I think the accountability mechanism that you propose is appropriate relative to the report to the chancellor on those rare exceptions where admissions process has been overruled. I guess I wonder why the concern about having a written record of that conversation, given that these would be presumably permanent protected records, so all the privacy protections are accorded to all parts of an admission process is already in place. Why treat at one particular interaction, which is of course a particularly sensitive and important one, why treat that differently than the rest of the admissions process?
Well, I think actually we commented in here, let's see if I can find it for you. The most unfortunate outcome of the recent controversy relating to UT Austin's admissions procedures has been the disclosure of identities and case information that ought never to have become objects of public discussion. Individual students have been subjected to damaging publicity and embarrassment. Any future accountability measure regarding admissions must be built on a commitment to protect the privacy of students and graduates. So history has shown that we haven't been up to protecting them in these kinds of circumstances, and so we're recommending that it not be done.
Correct.
Are you suggesting that additional portions of the admissions process should also be removed from the written record, or just the interaction between the president and the chancellor?
No, we're talking just the final interaction does not need to be written, shouldn't be written. The interaction with the president, what we envisioned is really a very simple process. We envisioned the president would come down and have interaction with the chancellor, which I'm sure will go on regularly anyway, and part of the discussion one time in the spring would be, Mr. Chancellor, let me tell you how this process worked. There were 7 students. This was the overall reasons why I made changes. Personally, I don't think it would be necessary to go into, let me tell you about 1, let me tell you about 2, let me tell you about 3, but that would be up to the chancellor. The chancellor could have whatever level of specificity he or she wanted at the time. And as Dan Burke said, if for some reason the chancellor felt the process was not working properly, the chancellor would be in a position to say, next year I want to do it differently.
And I might add to that, it does not have to be a written report. The chancellor is reporting to the board. And he can give a report to the board about the findings of the discussion that he has
it was a very bad situation that occurred. And I would just hate to see that ever happen again to a student or an applicant. So I think this is a better process, and I totally concur with the board's recommendation.
Were those situations because of the violations of FERPA or because of, or there's a lot of different ways information can obviously get out?
I don't know the details of how it all.
That was not our charge.
Went from public.
Obviously, but understanding the problem is important, but prescribing a solution.
It would be safe to say that, well, maybe I won't say that. Maybe this group doesn't keep secrets quite as well as it should. I'm just teasing, that's a little bit of humor for the group. So, I mean, you have to explain the humor, it's probably not very good humor, right?
Good thing you're an exchange.
I am an exchange. And it's also, sometimes things that are not said don't have to be taken back in a lot of things. But I think this is a conversation where oral conversation worked very effectively. This is a chance to learn something different.
Others? I've just a couple of comments. I do agree with you that the president has to be an ultimate arbiter of these decisions and ultimately is responsible for the overall institution, and that there should not be a firewall between the president's office and the admissions process. And I greatly appreciate the efforts that you went through to bring that to our attention. At the end of the day, we want to be a national leader in this arena, and we want to have best practices. And I believe that the process that we're going through is ultimately that's where we're going to be, and that's where the University of Texas should be. And so I commend you, Chancellor, for convening this Blue Ribbon panel. You are indeed a Blue Ribbon panel, and we appreciate all your work, and we look forward to your final recommendations as you study this further. So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We appreciate what you all do
very much.
Thank you very much.
Next, I'd like to ask Dr. Hewitt to make a presentation under item 18.
Today, the University of Texas system is launching Influence, a cutting-edge web portal that allows private sector, government agencies, and academic researchers to quickly find and connect with thousands of renowned research experts in next-generation facilities across the UT system's campuses and health institutions. These connections will facilitate collaboration among institutions, support the creation of productive partnerships with industry and government, and highlight the incredible breakthroughs of the faculty at all of our institutions. UT Systems faculty engage in research that strengthens the economy, educates the workforce of tomorrow, revolutionizes life-saving drugs and therapies, and improves life for the citizens of Texas and the world. In fact, the University of Texas system has more than $2.5 billion in research expenditures. That makes us second in the nation among institutions and systems of higher education. This research strength makes UT system faculty a clear choice for partnership to move ideas and innovations forward throughout the world. UT Systems research universities are magnets for businesses interested in partnering with scientists. They attract businesses that rely on an educated workforce. University research leads to startup companies and creates high-paying jobs. Faculty innovations generate income for the university community through technology licensing. The impact of university research on our lives cannot be overstated. From life-changing discoveries to revolutionizing the way we communicate. And the changes and leaps forward are simply escalating. Despite these impacts, public investment in research and development at universities is declining as a share of the total federal budget. Federally sponsored R&D once made up more than 10% of the budget, but it is now less than 4%. And the U.S. ranks 10th among OECD countries in overall R&D investments as a percentage of GDP. These declines, as noted in a report published just last month by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, are leading the United States to a potential innovation deficit that could threaten national economic competitiveness as well as national security. This downturn is further exacerbated by U.S. companies which perform very little basic research, less than 4%, and are becoming even more narrowly focused on development. In the past, U.S. businesses have research labs that conducted applied research, but increasingly this is no longer the case. Instead, industry is relying more than ever on university research to drive innovation. In response to the changing research landscape, and enabled by funds approved by the Board of Regents last May, inspired by the vision of Vice Chancellor Hearn, Regent Hall, and the Regents are a member of the Research and Technology Transfer Committee, today, the UT system launches Influent, a free website and a powerful advanced concept search engine that allows anyone with access to the internet the ability to search and easily connect with researchers, faculty experts, facilities, and innovations across all UT system institutions. This tool can serve as a catalyst to drive partnerships between industry and faculty and fill the funding gap left by declining federal spending. The goals of this project are to promote collaboration across institutions, to foster the creation of effective partnerships with industry, and to feature the incredible work of the faculty at all of our UT system institutions. We seek to put creativity and innovation front and center, and to demonstrate that the University of Texas system is a partner that can move projects and ideas forward. The problems of our global culture are complex. The teams needed to solve those problems must also be complex. Teams and ideas must cross traditional boundaries between departments and even institutions. And universities and industry must work together to develop partnerships that advance basic research and streamline technology transfer. Influent can facilitate this process. Now, if you'll come with me for a moment. So, imagine for a moment that you're an inventor entrepreneur who has created a new mobility assistance device for the aging and for those with degenerative diseases like Parkinson's disease. You're looking for experts to help you refine your design and test it to make sure it also works. And so you heard about this great new site called Influent that the University of Texas system has. So, I would come here to influent.utsystem.edu. This website is live and operational right now. And I would type in Parkinson. And you can see that when I entered the word Parkinson, the list returned 361 experts. But I want to really further refine this concept because I'm really interested in Parkinson's disease. So I'm going to go to the concept list and I'm going to select Parkinson's disease, which narrows it a little bit more to 322 experts. But for my mobility assistance device, since I'm located in Texas near the Dallas, Arlington area. I'm going to further refine my search and actually look for UT Arlington and UT Dallas. So now we're at 12 experts. So now I'm going to explore a couple of these experts. So here we'll click on the first expert, Cindy Milo de Frias. Here is her her information, her fingerprint. These are the concepts that she researches. She's in the Department of Cognition and Neuroscience at UT Dallas. These are her research articles. I can click on and read any of these. So I'm seeing here that she studies reaction time in relation to aging adults with Parkinson's disease. So that's good information for me to know. I think she might be a potential partner for me. Now I see, and there's one at UT Arlington, so I'm going to click on Christopher T. Ray. Christopher T. Ray is in the Department of Kinesiology at UT Arlington. Christopher studies his exercise and improving physical function in Parkinson's patients, and I can notice from the concepts right here related to his research. So he's another potential candidate. So, right off the bat, first two people I've found are good potential partners for me for developing my mobility device. However, I don't want to stop my search here because just yesterday I read an article about a researcher at UTMB, and I don't remember as a female researcher, I can't quite remember her name, so I'm going to actually select UT Medical Branch and see if I can figure out who that was. And when I look at the list of results returned to the names, I see, it was Elizabeth J. Protas. So I'm going to click her and check out her profile. And also, I would note that we can see here that she's the Vice President and Dean of the School of Health Professions. And she also does research on walking, rehabilitation, physical therapy, exercise-related interventions in aging adults with Parkinson's disease as well. So now, from my search results, I've decided, I want to contact Elizabeth, so I'm going to click on her name, and Cindy, and Christopher Ray. And then I'm going to click this button, and I can actually enter my name, my organization, my email address, my telephone number, and then with the click of a button, I've contacted all three researchers individually. What I've demonstrated for you here is that I found 3 potential partners, 3 different departments: cognition and neuroscience, kinesiology, and the School of Health Professions, 2 academic and 1 health institution. The traditional search, you might go, who's the expert that I've heard of in Parkinson's disease, and just go to that person. But now, I have people who have specialties in cognition and exercise, that have worked with devices before. So this is a perfect team now that I can pull together across these 3 institutions to help me refine and maybe eventually commercialize my device. So that is the power of this tool. It really opens your mind to the teams that you can form and what is possible. So, I'm very excited about the potential of this tool. I do recognize that ultimately for this tool to be successful, it has to be useful. And people must know that it's out there and for them to use it. We are working with UT System External Relations Departments, and we have a plan in place that includes externally focused advertising, social media, as well as campus outreach efforts, all in coordination with system offices and institutions. The work is only just beginning and will require continual effort for us to get the word out and get people to use this amazing resource. And one example of some of our outreach efforts is this short video I'm going to show you.
You have an idea that you're ready to take it to the next level. We're a partner. We can help move your project forward. But how do you find the right person or network of people with expertise, resources, and facilities? The University of Texas System's Influent platform is your answer. Influent is the free online tool that provides a single search of more than 15,000 faculty from UT System institutions across Texas. Search by keyword to discover the specific researchers, faculty experts, the innovations, and the facilities you need. Whether you're searching for a partner to develop life-saving drugs and medical devices, or experts in business and languages where you want to do business, or to create life-changing innovations in energy, engineering, and manufacturing, Influent gives you the power to search for the experts and facilities you need, so you can establish the networks and partnerships you want. Influent also makes it easy to take the next step and connect. Take advantage of the useful resources on the Influent website to help you form a lasting and productive partnership with the University of Texas system. The possibilities are unlimited. To learn more, visit us online.
Any questions?
I think it's fabulous.
I just want to say, congratulations on the progress today, and it is a very exciting tool that you all have been developing, and we see this as instrumental in helping our, there's parts of higher ed and the health side that are siloed, some involuntarily. And this goes a long way to make sure all of our human resources are available to each other, the public, and partnerships, and I think it's incredibly exciting.
So one quick question. Who do you envision is the primary user of this product? Is this the general public? Is it the UT community? Is it, I'm just, is it somebody doing a Google search?
That's a great question. There are actually multiple users. So there's the faculty users, because the faculty now have an opportunity to connect with their colleagues across all of the campuses, especially when we're looking at these issues that involve multidisciplinary approaches to a single problem. You might know people in your discipline, but you may not know the others who you need to bring in to have this holistic viewpoint. So that's one of the audiences. The other audience, of course, is industry. And we are going to be attending some industry-oriented conferences, advertising in some industry journals, doing some web advertising, hopefully some good media hits and areas that industry read, publications, etc. So that's another important audience. I think those are really two primary audiences. However, I can think of a number of examples where someone looking for an expert witness, or someone looking for someone who could speak on a TV show or a publication. So I think that we don't want to limit ourselves, but certainly industry and faculty are the primary audiences at this point. But I think we're going to find, as I have with a lot of different things, that the more you get into it, the more usage you see that you haven't really even thought of.
I know publications and citations are part of it, but is the intellectual property that also going to be embedded in that for?
Such as patents and, and things of the and grants, et cetera. Yes, we are currently exploring, Dr. Hearn and I are working to explore what data we can use to augment the faculty profiles so that we can show patents and intellectual property.
Thank you, Dr. Ewing and Regent Hall for your leadership. All right, next, I'd like to call on Dr. Mintz for a presentation on item 19 on page 17.
The number one challenge facing public higher education nationally is, of course, dramatically enhancing student learning outcomes, defined both in terms of graduation rates and career success. Our campuses have been leaders in this effort, and it's our pleasure today to talk about the next step that the Office of Academic Affairs, the Institute for Transformational Learning, and our campus partners are taking to promote student success. The IPL's mandate is to tackle the iron triangle, simultaneously addressing the issues of access, affordability, and quality. The UT system, faculty, and campuses are extraordinarily fortunate to have the resources, financial, intellectual, and institutional, to address this challenge head-on. Many universities have tried to tackle one quarter of the Iron Triangle, but no institution has addressed all three corners simultaneously. But thanks to your investment and the commitment of campus leadership and faculty, the UT system is launching the nation's largest, most ambitious plan to address all aspects of the Iron Triangle at once. Together, we are instituting a holistic solution that will provide our students with next-generation curriculum designs that are career-aligned, with pedagogies that are competency-based, personalized and adaptive, and filled with challenge-based pedagogies, a strong technical and analytical infrastructure that can provide 360-degree just-in-time support, and course schedules that can better meet the needs of non-traditional students. Marty Baker-Stein will now discuss the specifics of this first-of-its-kind initiative.
So our first initiative on this front is a hybrid BS and biomedical sciences program at UT Rio Grande Valley that's going to launch this fall. Working with faculty from across the UT system, we began by defining competencies and performance outcomes for medical school. And from this work, we then backed into the undergraduate experience, defining what students need to know and what they need to be able to do and to value by the time they enter medical school or other graduate destinations in the health professions. Working with faculty at UT Rio Grande Valley, we continued on to remap the entire learning experience of the four-year degree, modularizing the trajectory so that students can collect micro-certifications and celebrate more wins on the path to graduation. For the hybrid components of the degree, we've targeted a block schedule, which is students take courses, all their courses in the morning, all their courses in the evening, or all their courses on Saturdays into the future, so that they're able to get the courses they need when they need them and easily schedule their work, research, or clinical experiences during their unscheduled hours. Many of these students work, almost all of them work, and many of those students work full-time while they're going to school. We don't want that to slow them down. The curriculum is synergized across disciplines. For example, freshman composition, world literature, history are presented through the lens of science and technology, and actively encourage students to make connections between what they're learning in their biomedical coursework and the transdisciplinary worlds around them. The learning experience itself is a mix of performance-based assessments and problem-driven missions that students work on online, along with team-based case analyses and projects that they dive into during their face-to-face class hours, mentored by faculty and shoulder-to-shoulder with their cohort. As students move through these missions, they collect progress and challenge points, and in the end earn both a competency or performance mastery transcript and a traditional grade-based transcript. The slight gamification of the experience is key here, both as an engagement strategy to keep students on track, but also as a way to empower students to better understand where they're going with each learning experience they have, and the value proposition of these experiences vis-a-vis their future goals. The analytics produced by the gamification of the experience allow us to flag just-in-time interventions that are sometimes academic and sometimes more related to everyday life. Each student in the program will have a dedicated student success coach and instructional facilitator for every disciplinary path they travel down, who will stay with them throughout their degree program. We have accomplished a lot in a short amount of time. This project actually started. We started working with faculty and UTRG leadership in November of 2014. And we've made fast progress in large part because we've taken an island approach to this initiative. And by island, we mean that with the assistance of UTRG leadership, we've been able to create a space for innovation and disruption that's free of the constraints of incumbent technologies and traditional approaches to services and schedule, et cetera. We're a coalition of the willing. We at the ITL, many folks are here today from the ITL, and the faculty of UTRGV have been encouraged to imagine new models for the future of education. Based on this prototype, we're working closely with the Office of Academic Affairs to extend this important work to campuses and students across the system. In December, the Office of Academic Affairs released an RFP, or a call for programs, to all of the UT system campuses, calling for proposals that targeted high-demand degrees that serve high-demand employment opportunities. We reviewed 21 proposals from across the system, and from these selected a strong portfolio of programming that will launch in the fall of 2017. These include programs in the health professions, programs in engineering, computer science, business, and criminal justice, and we hope this is just the start. We will take a unified approach to design and development of these programs. We will engage a system-wide research collaborative around both their design development and their implementation. And from the work we're doing in these programs, we will create a system-wide content repository of all of the assets we produce for these programs and courses. So for example, videos, simulations, cases, performance-based assessments, serious games. Any asset that's made for any of these programs will be put into a content repository that's accessible by faculty across the system to remix and rematch and build into new programs and new courses. So in order to offer this program, the program of UTRGV is in a hybrid or part online, part face-to-face environment. Some of these other programs may be totally online, if that remains to be seen. But in order to offer these programs in a way that is high fidelity and cutting edge and effective, and by design, and by design ready to support personalized education, accelerated forms of education, competency-based education. We have been developing a new platform or infrastructure that's really designed to support this kind of high-impact learning. So I wanted to show you, I have them on the slides. I wanted to show you the actual application we've been working on, because some of you have heard about this before and some of you have not. We decided that in order to get to the goal, that we wanted to get to, we were going to have to work with a stack. I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to show you the live application, but it is here. But we decided very early on that there was really nothing off the shelf that we could use to support this kind of high-impact environment. But that said, we didn't want to invent our own application, our own software. So instead, we took the approach of creating a stack of software, the best-in-breed LMS functionality, learning management systems, CRM functionality, analytics capabilities, content aggregation capabilities, apps, the very best that are out there, and build a unified user experience over this stack that could compete with the high-fidelity content and media experiences that students have in their everyday lives. And so the slide we're looking at here, the students come into the app, they can check out their profile, and they can actually see in real time across their entire program, their entire term, where they are. Are they ahead? Are they behind? Are they on track? And what they need to get, what they need to do to take the next step. When they come in, they can also see everybody who's in their program and easily reach out to them. Folks who are in the cohort or the classes that they're taking in the morning or the evenings or on Saturdays, and connections that they build up. The profile also connects to LinkedIn and other social media sites where they can actually extend that community of learning beyond the program itself. When they come up here to the top, that nav, if they swipe it, they can see all the courses that they're enrolled in. We've clicked on Mind, Brain, and Behavior course here where they happen to be ahead. In biostatistics, they're on track. In the next course, they may be behind, and they can just see that in one glance. If they come down, they can also see for this week where they are in terms of their goals for the week. The system actually encourages students to set weekly goals for progress and pace. If students want to accelerate, they can do that. If they need to decelerate, take their time a little bit, they can do that. But they make a goal and then they track it against the week, and the system will give them notifications when they're hitting their milestones or where they might be falling behind. When they click into the courses, the system is designed so that they never feel lost and they never feel alone. So when they come back into their courses, it brings them right back into where they were the last time. And you can see they're going to resume the fascinating world of the human nervous system, and they can see everybody else from their cohort who's in that unit at this time and easily reach out to them with social tools to ask questions, start a discussion, commiserate. Once they get into the actual unit themselves, there is a set of activities. They go into each one. As they go into the activity opens up. We have beautiful content and beautiful performance-based assessments that we're working with a variety of partners to produce at commercial grade. Once they click through the activities and they finish this unit, there's actually a micro celebration that celebrates that moment of completion once they learn, and then asks them if they want to continue on to the next piece of work. All of the content in the platform is available both online and offline. So if students get out of a zone of connectivity, which could easily happen in the Valley or in many places in Texas, like my neighborhood in Barton Hills, they have the content that is there for them and they never get stuck, and there are no excuses for not working ahead on their progress. The system integrates lightly and sometimes deeply with the world of applications that are out there. Every day there are new applications being invented for teaching biomedicine, anatomy and physiology, calculus. They're beautiful, they're well designed, they are oftentimes full of extremely high impact pedagogical approaches, and we want to be able to bring those applications into the experience. We do not want you to need to invent all of them or develop all of them ourselves. We are also working very closely to support the program with a company that's called Inside Track, who is going to be providing academic coaching for the students, not the academic coaching, sorry, the student life cycle coaching for the student experience. Students will get a coach at UTRGV this summer as soon as they are admitted, and that coach will be working with them very closely throughout the first year, touching base at least once a week. We'll have access to data coming out of the system as to whether they're ahead, behind, et cetera, and we'll be able to make very, just in time and very targeted interventions with those students. The system itself supports that. You can see at the top, the students can click out to their coach with one click, send a message saying, I'm stuck. That message will be contextualized to where they are when they're stuck. And also, the coach will be notified, and their faculty and instructional facilitators will be notified when they get behind, so that those faculty and facilitators and coaches can reach out just in time to ask the student if they need help and to figure out where they need help. So that is the total education experience, or what we call TEX, and our report on the progress of our work to date. And I will stop there to see if you have any questions.
Any comments or questions?
Thank you, Dr. Rushine. I'm excited by this. So you can't help but be in Texas and see all the Western Government University ads. And so given that they focus on competency online and also overlapping 3 out of 5 areas that we're going to be looking, if I'm the target audience out there, how do I compare and contrast this experience with that other experience?
So Western Governors has really focused in on that adult working professional degree completion, in many cases audience. It remains to be seen which audience for each of these verticals we will be reaching out to. In the case of UTRGV, it's a more traditional audience. These students are 18 to 24-year-olds. I think another thing we're saying on this point is, what does competency-based education mean? There are 100 different definitions of it. Our definition is we really are looking to work with industry and the professions to map out competencies that students are actually working a lifetime toward. And as they're working through these courses, they're hitting milestones, enabling objectives that stack up to those competencies. But it's going to take years, and even when they finish medical school in this case, they're going to have to continue working on those competencies as competencies in that profession evolve. So that's how we think of it. I think many of these other programs, I won't speak for Western Governors, tend to define competencies as courses chalked up into pieces. So instead of a course, you've now won 3 competencies. I think that's different. I don't know if that'll distinguish us in the marketplace, but in the end, I think that's going to distinguish us when it comes to student success and to their ability to accelerate through the programs and honor completion rates, which we have very high hopes and high standards for.
I would just add to that much of what passes for competency-based education is actually self-directed learning. As you can see from what we demonstrated, this is anything but wholly self-directed learning. This has been carefully designed by our faculty to ensure student success and to really earmark the specific proficiencies and kinds of knowledge that students need to obtain, and carefully designing the activities and assessments to make sure that they get there. And it's all supported by wraparound student support services to make sure that they can get to goal. But if I had to say one word, quality is the difference.
Just a question. So what's the single biggest challenge y'all face right now? If you had to pick one.
The scale and the pace of the initiatives ahead are extraordinary. And so we need to meet the demands of that scale and that pace, and the challenges of that scale and that pace do hit us from a lot of different directions. But we are working really closely with all of the divisions and functions here at the system to make sure that we're all on the same team as we're moving this out, and we're working very closely with the campuses to identify those hurdles before we hit them and be proactive. It's been great to work with UTRGB over the last year because we have mapped the hurdles and are now in a much better position to figure out how to deal with them.
We have an asset that I don't think any other system in the country has, and that is the partnership with campus leadership and campus faculty. We have 22 proposals for these competency-based degree programs. We were able to select 11 for funding and support, and I don't think you can see anything quite like that elsewhere, where there is as much buy-in as there is in the UT system.
Thank you very much, and congratulations. All right, under item 20, I am very pleased to make a recommendation concerning the Santa Rita Award, the highest honor bestowed by the Board of Regents. This award is reserved to recognize extraordinary contributions to UT institutions, a deep commitment to higher education, and service to the UT community. The award takes its name from Santa Rita, the discovery oil well that transformed the University of Texas system. Since the creation of the award in 1968, only 24 Santa Rita awards have been made. The last award was given given to former board chairman James Huffines in 2010. It gives me great pleasure today to nominate the Seeley and Smith Foundation of Galveston as the 25th recipient of the Santa Rita Award. And while it is unusual to consider an entity rather than an individual for this award, the Foundation's long history of support for and contributions to UT system is unusual, unique, and legendary. Established in 1922 by John Seeley and Jenny Seeley Smith, joined by her husband R. Waverly Smith, the Foundation has contributed almost $1 billion to support medical education and the delivery of health care at UT Medical Branch in Galveston, including funding for the construction of its hospitals, its biosafety lab, endowed academic and clinical positions, and equipment. In many respects, it is through the vision and strategic direction of the Seeley and Smith Foundation that UTMB serves Galveston, the state of Texas, and the nation as a premier health institution. The Seeley and Smith Foundation is also the largest single entity contributor to the UT system. If approved, I recommend that this very significant award be bestowed upon the Foundation at an appropriate ceremony to be held in Galveston, when we may celebrate the Foundation's lengthy record of dedication and service to higher education. Do I hear a second to this recommendation?
Second.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Hicks. Before we vote, are there any questions or comments anybody would like to make? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We are going to take a brief break because the Seeley and Smith Foundation don't know that they got this award, and the Chancellor and I are going to go make a quick phone call, because we'd rather hear it from us than those. Okay, so we'll be right back. We'll be brief. I would like to recognize and thank Dr. Pedro Reyes for his many years of service to UT Austin and the entire UT system. Dr. Reyes joined the UT Austin faculty in 1991 and was named Associate Vice Chancellor for Academic Planning and Assessment for the UT system in 2003. In January of 2012, he was appointed Executive Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs. In that role, he has provided strategic and administrative leadership to the presidents of UT's 9 academic institutions. Throughout his tenure at the UT system, Dr. Reyes continued to teach and to hold the title of Ashbel Smith Professor of Education Policy at UT Austin, also serving as the Director of the UT Austin Texas Education Research Center. We are very pleased that Dr. Reyes has agreed to continue as Special Assistant to the Chancellor through December of this year to provide guidance on UT RTV issues, UT Systems Engineering and Computer Science Initiative, the establishment of the Americas Institute, and other high-profile projects. Following a short sabbatical, well-deserved, I might add, Dr. Reyes will return to the faculty at UT Austin next year. Dr. Reyes, would you please come forward and join the Chancellor and me? Yeah, the good news is he's not going anywhere. All right, next, we will recognize and thank President Bill Powers for his outstanding outstanding service as president of the University of Texas at Austin. President Powers became president of UT Austin in 2006. He's an admired leader who has advanced the university in many ways. He recently concluded a record-breaking $3 billion capital campaign, worked with the UT system and the Board of Regents to establish the Dell Medical School, and to launch construction of a $310 million engineering education and research center, which together will be a major catalyst for even greater achievements at UT Austin. And I could spend an hour going through his achievements and his accomplishments. But we all know President Powers very well. President Powers, would you please come forward to join the Chancellor? And this is the last regular board meeting for student regent Max Richards, who I think was taking a fine this morning. His service as UT System student regent has been exemplary, and we wish him all the best as he participates in UT's Archer Fellowship Program in Washington, D.C. this next fall. Regent Richards, I believe your proud parents are present. Would you introduce them, please?
Absolutely. I'd like to introduce my parents, David and Laura Richards, right over here. Please stand up.
And would you please join me to accept the certificate of appreciation?
Absolutely.
First off, I would like to once again acknowledge my parents, David and Laura Richards. They've always been in my corner, they've always been my biggest fans, and I would not be here today if it wasn't for them. So once again, thank you. I came to the Board of Regents last year at a very exciting time. With 2 medical schools soon to be online, my term has been at a time that UT system has gone through a transformation. With programs like CQT, which provides real-time data for incoming freshmen to decide what major they would like, in addition to projects like UTRGV. These are all very exciting projects that embody the progress that UT system is making and the strides that we're making to make sure that higher education is both affordable and accessible to all students. During my term, I've had the opportunity to meet with students from all 15 campuses, both academic and medical institutions. During these visits, students have asked me what my favorite part of being the student regent has been. Unequivocally, I can say the best part of being the student regent has been the people that I've worked with for almost a full year. From the day I started on June 1st and a little beforehand, I've received a huge warm welcome, and I would like to thank Francie, Michelle, Chrissy, and Dr. Safety, in addition to everyone else at UT System, for helping me throughout this very, very fun year. To the board and each individual regent, on behalf of the UT System, I would like to thank you for your relentless pursuit and and trying to make a better UT system. The students are fortunate to have such a diverse group of regents that bring together an arsenal of expertise that can literally tackle any problem. You all spend countless hours of your time trying to leave a positive impact, and each and every single one of you has touched hundreds of thousands of lives. Think, the system is a little over 216,000 students. After your terms are completed, you could have very well reached out to 1 million students. This doesn't even include the impact you have had on their families, in addition to subsequent generations of children. It is definitely safe to say that probably by your tenure, you will have reached tens of millions of lives by the time generations have passed and you sprawl out to the families. This is an outstanding number, and each of you have immense reach, and I would like to thank you all for your service to the future generations to come. Chancellor, it's been a pleasure serving with you over the last few months. You offer visionary leadership to the UT system, and it has truly been an honor working with you. Once again, thank you to everyone that has made this year truly exceptional. And I have no doubt that UT system will continue to have a very, very promising future ahead. Thank you all.
Okay, we will defer the recommendations and the reports of the standing committees until later in the meeting. May I ask Chancellor McRaven, the Executive Vice Chancellors, Vice Chancellor Sharpthorne, Lee, and Zafferty, Mr. Tames, President Colasurto, Mr. Kevin Dillon, and Mr. Jeff Richards, General Counsel Frederick, Mr. Morales, and Ms. Pendergrass to remain for executive session. Lunch will be available at noon, which is now, on the second floor for those not involved in the executive session. The board will now recess the executive session in accordance with sections 551.071 through 551.074 and section 551.076 of the Texas Government Code. No action will be taken in executive session, and following executive session, we will reconvene in open session. For the record, the date is May 14th, and the time is 12 o'clock noon, Austin local time. Please stop the webcast. Thank you. So, the time is 3:11 p.m. Austin local time. We will now hear reports and recommendations from the standing committees, beginning with Academic Affairs. Chairman Alexander.
Mr. Chairman, the Academic Affairs Committee has 7 action items for consideration that were considered by the committee and approved. Item 2 on page 197 requests authorization to establish the College of Architecture, Planning, and Public Affairs at UT Arlington to amend the Regents' rules accordingly. Item 3 on page 199 recommends establishment of a Doctor of Philosophy degree program in Mechanical Engineering at UT El Paso. Item 4 on page 203 requests approval of Master of Science degree program in Identity and Security Management at UT Austin. Item 5 on page 208 recommends authorization of the East Campus Master Plan for UT Austin. Item 6 on page 215 proposes transfer of assets from UT Pan American, UT Brownsville, UT Health Science Center, South Texas, and Lower Rio Grande Valley Academic Health Center to UT Rio Grande Valley, effective August 30th, 2015, and the abolition of UT Pan American, effective September 1st, 2015. Item 7 on page 218 requests approval of tuition and fee proposals for UT Rio Grande Valley Tutoring Medical School for fiscal year 2016. Item 8 on page 224 recommends approval of tuition and fee proposals for the Medical School at UT Austin for fiscal year 2017. Chairman Foster, the Academic Affairs Committee recommends approval of these action items, and I move for approval.
Thank you. Audit compliance and management review, Chairman Hildebrand.
No report.
No report. Good report. Facilities planning and construction, Chairman Taylor.
Well, that's a lot more efficient
Planning and Construction Committee has 14 items for consideration, all considered by the committee and approved. Items 2 through 8 on pages 288 to 298 concern additions to the capital improvement program to include 4 projects at UT Austin, the Bureau of Economic Geology Building Laboratory Repair and Renovation, the East Campus Parking Garage, the Graduate Student Housing Complex, the Mentopolis Research Center Office Building Repair and Renovation, Student Housing Phase 6 project at UT Dallas, and 2 projects at UT Health Science Center Houston, the Medical School Extension Building Renovation, the UT Professional Building Garage Facade Replat Project. Now, the Medical School Renovation Project at Houston is linked to the purchase of real estate discussed in executive session. With respect for the committee's action yesterday, I recommend that the board table approval of the renovation project at this time. Further, items 9 through 14 on pages 300 to 311 request approval of design development and related actions for 7 projects. Item 9 relates to the Austin by Ellsworth Kelly project at UT Austin. Item 10 relating to the Speedway Mall and East Mall project also at UT Austin. It was revised to require that phase 2 of the project be brought back to the board. Item 11 concerns the parking structure, phase 4 project at UT Dallas, which is also being added to the CIP. Item 12 concerns the science building project at UT Rio Grande Valley. Item 13 relates to the radiation therapy building project at UT Southwestern Medical Center. And item 14 concerns the Mark Plaza project at the UT Health Science Center San Antonio. Item 15 on page 314 requests approval to modify the CIP to increase the total project cost for the E.H. Hereford University Center repurposing renovation project at UT Arlington. Mr. Chairman, the Facilities Planning and Construction Committee recommends approval of these action items, and I move approval.
Thank you. Finance and Planning, Chairman Hicks.
The Finance and Planning Committee has 4 items on the agenda, 3 action items for approval and presentation of utility performance summary. Item 3 on page 178 requests approval of fiscal year 2016 budget preparation policies and calendar. Item 4 on page 182 concerns utility performance summary. Any questions about that? Item 5 on page 188 requests approval of the annual distribution for the Permanent University Fund. Item 7 on page 192 requests approval of $7 million from the AUF for a shared service student analysis project. Chairman Foster, the Finance and Planning Committee recommends approval of these actions. I move approval.
Thank you. Technology transfer and research, I believe there are no action items. Is that correct? Thank you. And then Health Affairs, Chairman Craig.
The Health Affairs Committee has 4 action items for consideration that were considered by the committee and approved. Item 2 on page 406 recommends authorization of tuition and fee proposals for UT Southwestern Medical Center, UT Medical Branch Galveston, UT Health Science Center in Houston, UT Health Science San Antonio, and UT MD Anderson Cancer Center for fiscal year 2016. The recommendation includes revisions to proposed tuition for the UT Health Science Center San Antonio School of Health Professionals. Item 3 on page 246 requests approval to name a new brain institute at UT Southwestern Medical Center in honor of Peter O'Donnell, Jr. Item 4 on page 248 proposes preliminary authority for a Doctor of Occupational Therapy degree program at UT Health Science Center San Antonio. Item 6 on page 282 requests approval of $5 million of available university funds to support phase 1B of the UT system-wide diabetes and obesity control initiative and delegation of authority to contract with selected entities to conduct essential feasibility studies. Chairman Foster, the Health Affairs Committee recommends approval of these action items, and I move approval.
Thank you. The board will now vote to approve the recommendations of the standing committees. Would all in favor say aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? Pass.
Chairman Foster, I vote in favor of those. I do have an understanding relative to UT RGV's tuition recommended increase, which I opposed in the committee meeting. I'm voting for it now with an understanding that we'll be looking hard at whether we can reasonably provide an option for students to have 1 year as opposed to 4 year mandatory opportunity as an option.
Regent Cranberg, I believe you have a motion on item 1A.
I move that the UT System Board of Regents take the following actions on behalf of UT Health Science Center of Houston.
You want to read the entire?
Yes, I'm afraid so.
Y'all have plenty of time.
Regent Cranberg, actually, each member of the board has seen the motion. You could just move that the board approve the motion that was previously provided.
I move that the board approve the motion for previously provided to authorize the purchase of land or equipment improvements located at 1133 John Freeman Boulevard and the leased library space there.
Thank you. Do I hear a second? All in favor? Any opposed? That passes. Regent Aliseda, do you have a motion on proposed negotiated gifts in item 3?
I do. I move that the UT System Board of Regents authorize the presidents of UT Austin, UT Pan American, UT San Antonio, UT Southwestern Medical Center, UT Health Science Center, Houston, UTMD Anderson Cancer Center, and the Vice Chancellor for External Relations to conclude negotiations necessary to finalize and accept gifts to benefit those institutions with potential naming features consistent with the terms and conditions outlined and recommended in executive session.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes. And Vice Chancellor Grant, I believe you have a motion on item 4B.
I do, thank you. I move that the UT System Board of Regents delegate authority to the Chancellor and the Executive Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs to conclude negotiations for the hiring of an individual as Chief Executive Director for Texas Energy Research, Education, and Engineering Institute, consistent with the terms and conditions of employment outlined and recommended in executive session. I further move that the Chancellor and the Executive Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs be authorized to conclude negotiations, execute an agreement with the individual regarding the terms and conditions of employment consistent with the parameters outlined in the executive session, with the requirement that the agreement be submitted to the board for approval via the usual budgetary procedures in compliance with all required notice requirements. Also further move that the minutes reflect by approval of this motion, the board has made a finding as required by Texas Education Code section 51.948 that the potential appointment is in the best interest of the UT system.
Thank you. Do I hear a second? Thank you. All in favor? Any opposed? That passes. Item 16 on page 67 concerns the proposed sale of O'Henry Hall. Do I hear a motion to execute that sale on the terms and conditions discussed in executive session?
So moved.
Second. Mr. Chairman, case. All in favor? Aye. Anybody?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, one opposed. Thank you. That passes. And item 24 on page 395 recommends amendment of Regents Rule 10101, 10401, and 10801. A revised recommendation has been provided to you. Vice Chairman Hicks, do you wish to move on this item?
Yes, I would like to move the motion as approved, and I would like to offer an amendment to the motion as it's on. Do we need a second on the motion first?
Yeah. Well, what's the right procedure
He could offer a revised.
there? Just make the motion with your amendment, and if it doesn't carry, then
The revision I'd like to offer is in Rule 10801, 5.4.5, 4 sentences from the bottom. A year ago, this board adopted the infamous 1+1 rule, where if the chairman and the chancellor oppose the regent's request for information, it comes to the board, and 7 members can vote against him having it, and 2 vote for, and it passes. It was nonsensical to me then, it's still nonsensical to me now. So I would move as an amendment that we change the vote from 2 to 5 regents, and that's my motion.
can I ask you, Is 5 appropriate, or should it be majority, in case?
Majority of Regents.
We accept that correction or that change? Discussion on this? I'm sorry.
Clarification, a majority of those voting or a majority of the members of the board? It would either
Majority of the members.
Frankly, I believe the Regents rules changes over the past year in this particular area have been designed to not only limit the ability for each regent to perform the fiduciary duties required by the law, but also slow down the speed that issues of concern may be brought to the board, not to mention thwarting our duties. It is not appropriate for the Board of Regents to delegate its fiduciary duties to the board that are individually held, nor to the employees for which are supposed to perform their duties for the system. So I would very much oppose to any further changes to these rules to make it more difficult to do our job.
Thank you, Regent Hall. Other questions or comments?
Just a clarifying comment, correct me, but the Texas A&M University system and Texas Tech system all have a Regents rule that requires a majority or five individuals to vote in the affirmative.
On this particular rule, I don't believe that either of the institutions have such a rule.
Not that I'm aware of. The problem comes in between the definition between action and information, and we're supposed to be the arbitrator. There's one set of votes for one and one for the other, and I think it is in the best interest for the board to work together. I would also say I think all of these information requests should be fulfilled whenever possible at the chancellor level. But if it comes to the board in that rare occasion, it needs to be a majority of the board that wants to do something, and that's why I offered that amendment.
Do I hear other comments, questions? Mr. Cranberg?
I oppose the motion, particularly as amended. I'm concerned even about the precedent of 1+1, because we individually, as board members, have a fiduciary obligation to satisfy good governance of the university. And more often than not, I think the great majority of the time, the idea of what constitutes adequate information for us to discharge our fiduciary obligation is shared by a majority, if not a unanimous consent of the board. On a very occasional time where it does not, can involve awkward, difficult questions that perhaps the majority of the board would not wish to be associated with endorsing. And I think it's part of what the citizens of Texas expect from the board, is that the occasional board member, even one that asks hard questions that are not endorsed by a majority of the board, should have information with which to be able to pursue reasonable lines of inquiry. I'm not unmindful of the fact that this this action is proposed in the context of the specific situation in which we find ourselves, in which Regent Hall has asked a lot of awkward questions about admissions, has asked a lot of awkward questions about purchasing and other topics in his wide-ranging investigations, and I wouldn't call them investigations of the system, but his own satisfying his curiosity. And it led to a number of very important revelations, which I'm confident that the system has and continues to respond in a positive and appropriate way to needed reforms. But I think that it would be unnecessarily neutering individual board members' reasonable lines of inquiry and be chilling in effect to impose a majority requirement. I'm reminded that this situation is a bit like Henry II asking, well, who will rid me of this turbulent priest? And for many long years afterwards, there was a great deal of regret that the turbulent priest was gotten rid of. These new rules, in my view, are analogous to
to the ridding of this turbulent priest. And if it's not Regent Hall today, perhaps it's another regent 5-10 years from now. Perhaps it's not admissions 5-10 years from now. Perhaps it's another difficult question that needs to be confronted, whether it be at our institution or other institutions. The lone voice of the prickly, difficult questioner must be respected and accepted in extremis. And I don't think this is a situation that calls for that.
Yes.
Mr. Kramer, I think you're making the assumption, however, that I, as the CEO, don't take these concerns seriously. And the fact of the matter is, if a single regent comes to me with an awkward request or something that appears to be inconsistent with the values of the University of Texas system, I guarantee you, I will look into them. That is my responsibility. My only issue with an individual regent making decisions that are contrary to the majority of the board is if, for whatever reason, a regent feels like he is not getting the response he needs from me, then all I ask is that they come back to the board. But I'm happy to answer and to provide access on awkward questions. And in fact, it is my responsibility to do so. And I bear that responsibility very, very seriously.
I know you do. I know you do, Chancellor, and I have the highest regard for you and your willingness and capability to discharge that responsibility. This is not just about this board or this chancellorship.
Well, but you have made it about this board and this chancellorship by focusing on Regent Hall's actions.
Well, his actions took place previous to your becoming chancellor. And in fact, I would say that this relates as much to questions that were asked that led to the Kroll report, allowing us to discover what we didn't learn in the Sharp inquiry, which all predated your tenure. And this is a much longer running journey of discovery that we've had as a board. This most recent incarnation of it is one that is, in my mind, not the purpose, not the point of the general discussion, but it's one about going back a couple of years. How does a board discover something which it should have had, which required an individual's persistent and sometimes highly controversial questioning, that not talking about what he's asking for today, and perhaps if you had been chancellor 6 or 8 months ago, exactly the same process would have transpired with Regent Hall's previous questions. I don't have confidence that every board and every chancellor would have allowed Regent Hall to have asked the questions that he did after the Sharp report came out. And there's a tremendous amount of pressure, including from some regents around this table, for him not to pursue those inquiries. And if he had not pursued those inquiries, we never would have learned what we learned, and we would never have had the opportunity to change our admissions process, to have heard from the Blue Ribbon panel today about recommendations that they're making to our previous processes that are going to make this university a better and more excellent and leading institution.
Regent Granberg, I agree with most everything you've said, and it's certainly not my intent, nor do I believe it's the intent of the board to restrict access to any data other than legally restricted data like FERPA and HIPAA and those kind of things. What we're trying to do, though, is bring some order on that rare occasion where a request is not automatically and routinely filled. On that rare occasion when it's either questionable legally or it's unreasonably burdensome, in which case the chancellor has to weigh in and make some decisions. And if those decisions don't meet with the approval of the board, then the board can set the chancellor on a different course. I don't think anybody wants to restrict access to information, and I certainly don't, other than FERPA. I'm very, very firm on that. But that's not the intent here, and you're making it sound as if it is, and we're in a public forum, and so I think it's very important to clarify.
Well, and I think that's exactly why it's important to have this discussion. The amendment of the Rule 10801 from a 1+1, which was a test of reasonableness, to a majority, it does not pertain to FERPA specifically, but to any and all information. And so I think that what we're doing here is hamstringing future regents, future boards unnecessarily, just because there are only 4 regents instead of 5 that might want to look into something that concerns them. And the history of boards around this country does not lend itself to a huge amount of confidence that 4 are always wrong and 5 are always right when we're looking about a mere issue of transparency.
And it's not always a matter of right and wrong, it's a matter of what set the direction of the board as well. And at some point, the majority has to rule.
I do believe that this amendment in particular is designed to thwart the ability of the regents to perform the fiduciary duty. I think Vice Chairman Hicks knows that. That's the purpose of it. And it gives the appearance that, that things that are of great concern to members of the board can be covered up now and in the future. And I think that's absolutely wrong. That does not serve the people of Texas.
I would disagree. I mean, and I'll follow up on what Regent Cranberg said. This is a request that the Chancellor and the Chairman have both said are unreasonable. All I'm asking, I think it's good governance. It comes to the board, and it shouldn't come to the board unless it's a very rare instance. But if it does, the majority of the board should rule, just like it does any other governing body. I mean, it's good governance to do that. I can't imagine that a 7 against and 2 for passes in any kind of legislative session I've ever seen.
We're not exactly talking about taking action or not taking actions. We're talking about allowing a regent with fiduciary obligations access to information which is in the system's possession. I'm not sure that that is the sort of action which need require a majority of the board. But I will say this, I am confident that if this rule had been in place with this board, the Kroll report never would have been instigated, and the Sharphorn investigation would have been the end of that investigation, and we would have ended the poor report.
I don't agree with that at all. I was in favor of doing a pro report, and I think several other people around this table were as well.
But I'd also offer that we answer questions from the regents every single day. And we do so without a whole lot of hoopla, because they are good questions, they come in, we're happy to answer them. I would agree with the chairman that my point in understanding the amendment here is that it is in those rare circumstances where, between consultation between the chairman and myself, we feel like the information is not appropriate or doesn't pass the common sense check or the reasonable check, that all we do is ask to come back with the board to look at it. I don't think that's unreasonable. This is not about little bits of information that then we conceal every minute of every day. It is about those rare occasions where we need information and we need clarity from the board.
Hang on, Regent Pavage first, and then we'll also.
I do not support the motion. I do believe and we all certainly have our own interpretation, and I do have a high respect for everyone's interpretation and everyone sitting around the table. To me, it's not about an individual regent or an individual chancellor. It's about a broad policy that's going to cover us today and in the future. It is restrictive in terms of the regent's right to his or her individual judgment as to what information is necessary for him or her to perform her duties, his duties as they see fit. So I might also add that we received the final red line version of the rules not even 24 hours ago, and I think something as important as this should take a little more time for discussion and time to process. And I know we spent quite a bit of time in discussion already, but in the future, I hope that for important issues like this, it's not a 12 to 24 hour period of time where we're trying to process the changes and the ramifications
Yeah,
going.
I'll accept responsibility for that. I apologize. I agree.
I know it
I
wasn't,
do not disagree.
you know, intended, it's just it's an issue.
Yes, Wallace.
Unfortunately, I've got a standing request. We had a meeting, it was public, the outcome was reinterpreted after the fact. You say you bring it back to the board had no vote, there was no action item on whether or not to give me the information or not. So I'm sorry, but that's not the way we've been operating in practice.
I'm prepared to give you the information short of FERPA. I've made that clear a couple of times.
I've been receptive to anything that I'd be willing to, you'd be willing to give me since day one.
That's not the conversation we've recently had here. It was,
Well,
FERPA was part of it. You know FERPA was part of it. That was part of the discussion.
Listen, my request still includes FERPA, but to the extent you want to give me other stuff, in the meantime, I'm happy to receive it.
Well, it was an all or nothing last time we,
So that's a negotiation, and
I'm happy to negotiate.
Well, I know, but what you're doing is that's a negotiation, and with all due respect, Paul, I'm sorry, this is not the way the fiduciary duty is carried out.
Mr. Chairman, I do have one question for Francie. Francie, you had a clarification as it related to the majority of the board. What happens in that rare occasion where somebody abstains or someone is not here? The region doesn't get the information?
That's correct. Under five vote rule, that's correct. And that is the current rule for amendments to the region's rules. We haven't had half of the region's rules trying to fail if there were fewer than the entire board attendance. Yes, that's right.
So still, it requires 5 votes even if there's only 6 people here, is what you're saying?
Correct.
Or if somebody abstains?
Right.
Correct.
All right. Do I hear a second to Regent Hicks, Vice Chairman Hicks' motion? Second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Sorry, it was, just to be sure, 1, 2, 3, is that correct? Okay. That passes 6-3. And that concludes the meeting of the board. We are adjourned. Please stop the webcast.